Fine with me. I don't think I've ever sat over here.
Oh, fun.
Oh, here, I take this too. Thank you.
Excuse me, just a moment.
Hi. I didn't think I've ever sat over here by you.
Yeah.
This is like a first for me.
A new perspective.
Yeah. That's what Adam gets for coming in late.
Well, go ahead and get started then. Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukee Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the table in the hall. If you have not picked up an agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. If you wish to be included in the mailing list for a decision, please add your name and contact information to the sign-up list located in the table in the hallway. If you wish to testify, please fill out a yellow comment card. We will follow the basic format listed on the back of the agenda. It includes all the hearing procedure steps. We may vary from the process based on the specific circumstances of each hearing. The next item on the agenda is Planning Commission minutes from January 9th. We're going to carry those over to the next meeting. We'll move on to informational items. Are there informational items from staff?
There are two. The first is just a note that we had a great open house on the comp plan. I know that a few of you were there, so we had great turnout and got good feedback. So we will be holding another one in about 6 months on the next block of policies. What staff is doing now is trying to sift through all the input that we got and develop some draft policies for review by the committee. The other item that I wanted to talk about is Lauren Loosfelt, the chair of the DLC, and I are going to give a short slideshow presentation about the design guideline project that we're currently working on. So I'm going to shift and we'll both go up to the table.
Great.
So we've stolen these slides from a presentation by our consultant, Sarah Architects. This was part of a presentation that was given to the Design and Landmarks Committee on April 2nd. And what we have contracted with Sarah to help us with this project to kind of move work forward. The Design and Landmarks Committee has been working on updating the guidelines for a number of months, and we've decided to just contract with Sarah to try to help move that forward a little bit quicker. So the first slide here that I wanted to cover is kind of why we're doing this, some of the goals. And there's a real disconnect. I don't know if you guys have found this if you've worked on a couple of the downtown projects, but there's a disconnect between the guidelines and the development standards. So from the planning department's perspective, we wanted to try to make that a stronger connection. The DLC, when they started into the process for design guidelines, they were really asked to update the photographs in the guideline book. And as they started in, this was one of those where they started in and said, well, we're not so sure we agree with the way these are written and organized. And so they started in and basically rewrote the character section. And once we've got that character section down, we want to see if everything else sort of meets that character. Are we really achieving the objectives in the guidelines and in our standards? So as we met last or 2 weeks ago with the, I guess it was just last week, wasn't it? With the DLC and our consultants, it became apparent that the structure that we have, where we have a separate guideline document that's separate from the code, may not be as efficient as it could be. And we look to our current guidelines related to multifamily housing. And so we've got a design element this is a page clipped from our current code. We have design elements identified, and then a design guideline that is the sort of the objective of that element that really describes kind of what is supposed to occur there. And it is, to meet the guide, somebody has a choice of either meeting the guidelines or meeting the development standards. So when you go through that multifamily process, you can either pick one of those two tracks. And then on the other column here in our current code is the design standard that implements that guideline. So it's very clear that there's a connection between the guidelines and the standards. In our current arrangement with the downtown code requirements, that is not true. So objective is to try to match those up. So I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, and we have about, 5 more slides. Do you want to switch seats?
No.
Okay.
You can steer. There you go. So the overall goal was to try and find a way to weave the standards and the guidelines together in a way that's clear for the applicant on one side of the table, that's clear for the planning member, staff member on the other, and then is clear for us, the DLC, who tries to discern this, and then the Planning Commission. So clarity throughout was the overarching goal. So as we're trying to weave this together, we were looking at ways, and the proposition that I think that came from Sarah last week was that we try and establish a vision, a principle, and land use framework kind of as the structure of weaving these things together. And then topic by topic, and you can go to the next slide, we look at how we take the vision, which may have come directly from the guideline, which is kind of an overarching goal or kind of vision, as it's appropriately titled. We take the principles within it, which might be may come from the regulatory standard, or it may be the recommended portions of the guidelines as our principles, right? And then we work into that the downtown riverfront and framework. So this would be kind of the backbone structure of the document as we move forward. So then we would pick each one of those principles and break it down even further into a design element, whether it be a physical or a built component. We look for the purpose and intent within that piece, and then the design standard, which may be very prescriptive, may come directly from the standard, may say it has to be, at every 100 feet we break at this, we change this material at this height, corners have to be angled, whatever it might be, it's the prescriptive piece to that. And then the guidance goes beyond that to further explain. So,
Next one.
next slide. So looking at a specific example, exterior materials. So we take exterior materials as a design element, the purpose or intent to encourage the construction of an attractive building with materials that evoke a sense of permanence and are compatible with the downtown Milwaukee and surrounding built and natural environment. So that's kind of a very evocative statement to make, right? It's
And taken directly from the code.
well, it's a very well-written, evocative code, probably the more of any I've seen. Design standard, so then we get into the prescriptive, 65% or more coverage within a primary material, et cetera, and then guidance. Guidance might be some of the less stringent, less prescriptive pieces of the guideline that fill in the guidance, which are the recommended or not recommended.
And it can use should language instead of shall language. Kind of what are we
Yes.
trying to achieve?
So as we see it, a lot of the standards guidelines can fill in the purpose and intent piece. This is the initial blush at it, we believe. And then the guidance piece comes largely from the guidelines. And in theory, this is a fairly clear way of merging the two. It's going to get messy. There are a lot of pieces that, as we've learned in our process, are not clear in how they overlap. And in some places, there are loopholes that we're trying to close when a standard doesn't correctly reference a guideline. So we're going to work through all of that. And so here we have kind of the catalog of design elements that we're going to be looking to. So this is both the standards and the guidelines all up here. And we're going to take some of the more difficult pieces first. So we're going to look at the architecture section right away. That's one of our primary goals within the next meeting, and look at specific examples of how that might happen. So this is kind of the plan we have that we are talking through. Is we discussed it at length with Sarah Architects last week. It seems like a very feasible way to achieve clarity for everybody, and that is the goal. So we want applicants to feel like they understand what happens when they come into a Type 3 process. We want from Vera to Brett to understand how to use those and guide applicants. And then for either one of us, the commission or the DLC, we want to feel like we know what we are, how we are reviewing projects, and do that in a very fair and clear manner.
We talked about expanding the committee's work and or the membership, and essentially looking at this, and we're actually seeking one or two commission members who might want to join and sit with the DLC during the 5 meetings that are coming up with the consultant to kind of work through this. And I've sent a personal invitation already to Scott. So being the most recent member to come from the DLC and having clearly a design background. So I didn't hear back from him though. But if any of you are interested, we're meeting next Tuesday, and we're going to try to dive into the architecture elements. The consultant team is coming back with a couple examples, and then the committee itself is going to split up some of the work and try to work on a couple of examples. We don't have a lot of time. Our contract with the consultant will end on June 30th. We're trying to get as far into this as we can so that staff can then package it into a reasonable package for a code amendment. And part of the reason we're coming to you is because this is going to be a code amendment that's going to be coming to you. So we wanted to get you up to speed as to where we're going. And it morphed. It morphed last week. And it's morphed a number of times while DLC has worked on it.
Yeah.
So you don't have to decide today, but you can give me a call. But we'd be happy to have a couple of you involved.
Great.
Anything else?
I agree. Nope.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Do you have a time and a place?
Here.
At-
Here, that's good.
Tuesday
I
here
think it's
at-
6 o'clock.
Okay.
I think it's 6:30. If you
If you're
come
interested-
at 6
if you're
o'clock,
interested,
you'll
let
get
me
pizza.
know. Yeah, thanks. I think you're right.
Does anyone have any other questions? I have one just to make sure. I actually looked at this when I was reviewing the materials. So this is what you're updating, right? This
Correct.
is from 2003 Milwaukee Downtown Design Guidelines.
Yeah, and it's
you're
way
correlating.
broader than the downtown design standards. There are many things it addresses that we didn't include in the standards. And so this is intended to perhaps modify the standards, perhaps modify the guidelines, do a little bit of both. Bring them more into alignment.
Yeah, and I think too, we want to continue the ability for project teams to take the Type 2 path and just follow the prescriptive checking of boxes and make their way through. We want to close some of the holes where we feel like there may have been larger acceptances than what we'd like, but also as a Type 3, we want to make sure that at any given time you can understand within a Type 3 what it's going to take before you make that leap. And so bringing these two documents together just made a lot of sense, I think.
I want to congratulate the city and the DLC because 7 years that I spent on the DLC, I think the first 3 of them was debating what is Milwaukee character and how do we tie this all together with the downtown. And it sounds like that you guys, with all the work that you've been doing, have finally found the right path and the right approach to get this thing kind of figured out. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I hope so.
It's very cool. Thanks.
Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah.
Okay. Move on to audience participation. This is an opportunity to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. If you wish to comment on an item that is on the agenda, there will be time for comments after the presentation. Does anyone wish to comment on an item that is not on tonight's agenda? Okay. The next item on the agenda is a public hearing on the Milwaukee Library reconstruction. Public hearing is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider application number CSU-2018-002, NR-2018-001, DR-2018-001, P2018-002. The purpose of the application is to request a major modification to a community service use, downtown design review, natural resources review, and parking modification on property located at 10660 Southeast 21st Avenue. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Milwaukee's zoning subdivision ordinance, comprehensive plan, and any applicable municipal code provision. The applicant has the burden of proving that the proposal conforms with all of the city's applicable criteria. I now ask staff to cite the zoning ordinance sections where the criteria can be found.
Section 304, downtown zones. Section 402, natural resources. Section 508, downtown site and building design standards. Section 605, vehicle parking quantity requirements. Section 700, public facility improvements. Section 904, community service uses. Section 907, downtown design review. And Section 1006, type 3 review.
All testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow a response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party with standing may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons with standing are those who submit written comments or testify in person or sign the Planning Commission attendance sign-up sheet in the hallway. Conduct of hearing. I will recognize those persons who have completed the testimony cards and given them to me. When you come to the podium, please state your name and address for the record so they may be entered into the minutes. If you are here to testify, please remember to confine your remarks to the application and the relevant criteria and to avoid repetition and irrelevant information. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. Okay. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to abstain from this hearing?
No.
No.
Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
Yes. I'm not sure if this is ex parte contact or potential conflict of interest, but I had been working with the city manager, and we were trying to get a donation for an interior design ceiling. And I actually had a very brief conversation with the library director where I asked a question, which I then asked of staff today, and I got an answer about the meeting of the April 24th meeting. So,
Okay. Does any member of the Planning Commission wish to report on any ex parte contacts?
I may have just, but no.
No, it seems to me that's an ex parte communication you've disclosed. If anyone has objection to it, they may raise it.
Does anyone have any rebuttal to the ex parte contacts declared by the commissioners? No. Will any commissioner who has visited the site prior to this hearing please raise their hand? Did any of those commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or note anything different from what is indicated in the staff report for this application?
No.
Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? All right, let's proceed to the staff report presentation.
Good evening. Vera Coles, Associate Planner here with the Planning Department, and Lauren Lesvelt is here with the Chair of the DLC to present the portion of the staff report that relates to the DLC meeting and review of the project. Okay. The site is located at 10660 Southeast 21st Avenue. It's outlined here in the aqua color. It contains about 1.77 acres and is the location of both the Letting Library and Scott Park. The site contains mapped water quality resource areas and habitat conservation areas, which are the subject of the natural resources application before you. The site is in the downtown, adjacent to a natural area and a multifamily residential development directly to the west. The site is in close proximity to the Waldorf School, City Hall, and a residential neighborhood, and the zoning is the downtown mixed-use zone. In 2016, the City of Milwaukee passed a bond measure to fund improvements to expand the Letting Library, and as a result, the city is proposing to replace the existing library with a new, larger library building. The project involves the complete structural replacement of the Letting Library, resulting in a new 20,000 square foot, one-story library building on the existing library site. Site improvements include a reconfigured parking lot, stormwater planters, and other landscape elements. This is an illustrative site plan showing the location of the proposed new structure and the parking area. In addition to the community service use for a major modification to the existing CSU, the proposal requires a natural resources review. The property includes designated water quality resource areas and habitat conservation area, including delineated wetlands. And the proposed development would result in some WQR and HCA disturbance, triggering a need for the natural resources review. WQR is water quality resource, HCA is habitat conservation area. I would like to be able to stick to the acronyms if I can at some point. A downtown design review and a parking modification are also part of the application. The applicant is seeking a parking modification to allow 28 parking spaces rather than the maximum 24 parking spaces on the site for library use. And we'll get to that as one of the key issues in a moment. This graphic shows an outline of the proposed building superimposed on top of the existing library footprint in the dotted lines, as well as the existing parking lot extent. So you can see how the site overlaps with the new building. The sort of yellowish line that you see is the water quality resource area boundary on the site. So you can see that the existing library footprint is already encroaching on that water quality resource area, and we'll be discussing that in one of the key issues later in the staff report as well. So the application or the proposal requires a few different land use review processes. First is a major modification to a community service use. The library is a community service use in the downtown zone. Obviously, the complete reconstruction of that building is a major modification, and that's a type 3 review. Downtown design review, type 3 downtown design review is required because the proposal does not meet 5 of the downtown design standards established in the code in section 508. So downtown design review per 907 is required. That process requires a review and a recommendation by the Design and Landmarks Committee, and the DLC met on March 5th and provided recommendations to the Planning Commission, and Lauren will be presenting that information in a moment. The type 3 natural resources review is required because of the both temporary and permanent impacts to both the water quality resource area and the HCA as part of the project. The parking modification is a type 2 review, but it's bundled in with this review process. The way the code reads for parking, only libraries, not the park itself, are included in the parking table. So based on the proposed size of the library, 24 parking spaces is the maximum for the library. The modification asks for an additional 4 parking spaces to account for use of Scott Park as well. So the total of 28 is in the application. And finally, compliance with 606.1, that's the parking space and aisle dimensions. The site plan shows parking spaces that are 6 inches narrower than the minimum that the code requires. The way we're treating that within the application is that the applicant must either redesign the plan or provide drawings that show that the parking spaces will meet those dimensions, or they will need to request a variance. And we've included that as part of the conditions of approval. That is part of the development review that they would need to submit. They could show a parking lot that actually meets those dimensional standards, or they could request a variance, and we'd be back before this commission to take care of that. So again, the DLC reviewed this project on March 5th, and I'll let Lauren summarize the review process and the recommendations that the DLC made.
All right. So one of the primary issues we discussed was the facade, the west-facing wall. There was a requirement for, actually, is there any way we can get to an elevation? A requirement for transparency, which the project did not meet.
No, I don't have it. Sorry. I don't have an elevation.
Oh, okay, that's great. No, and one of the primary areas of concern was along the west facade at the parking area, and so we made the recommendation as a DLC that we have or include a minimum of 25% transparency along that major sidewalk, accessing the main entry. The project was close, if I recall, it was just under 20%.
Correct.
Second to that was lighting. So the project included ornamental lighting, which is not within the downtown guidelines or requirements for the traditional historic acorn fixtures. We talked about this quite a bit as a team and decided that as long as consistency was included along the main drive, along the street, there would be one acorn fixture, if I remember correctly, and then the city was going to be actually implementing some improvements along that same roadway, and additional acorn fixtures would be included. Then within that boundary of the parking lot, then if the project team so decided, they could go for the more modern fixture, which was appropriate and lent itself towards the design aesthetic of the building. We felt that was appropriate. We also asked them to consider adding lighting at the canopy near Harrison Street so that the signage from the building would be well lit in our winter evening hours, afternoon hours in the winter. So that was one additional recommendation that we made.
And these recommendations have been included as part of the conditions of approval for the project as well. And Lauren and I are going to tag team this key issue so that she can bring in the DLC perspective as well. So the first key issue that staff identified within the staff report is if the proposed design meets the downtown site and building design standards. And as we discussed, the proposed design meets all of them, but for 5 specific elements. The first is an element within the horizontal building facade section. That section requires significant breaks to be created along building facades at least every 150 feet by either setting the facade back or breaking the building into separate structures. The idea that we don't have one gigantic building with no relief in it. The 21st Avenue facade as proposed does not meet that standard. The proposed design utilizes glass at the main entry as a way of breaking up kind of the wings of the building, but it doesn't, in fact, have a 20-foot kind of recessed section, and it doesn't break up the building into two. So technically, it does not meet that standard. Jump in whenever.
Given the overall composition of the building and the use of materials and transparency, and given the point of the main entry and how it breaks that main facade, the west facade, we felt it was appropriate.
The second portion is the weather protection, and this is kind of an interesting standard in that the weather protection elements are intended to be no more than 6 feet. They're not intended to extend more than 6 feet over the pedestrian area. The design proposes an 11 to 13 foot wide pedestrian area, so the weather protection is actually wider than it's supposed to be, but because it's actually over a pedestrian area on the property, it's not extending over right-of-way or anything like that. Technically, it doesn't meet the standard. It exceeds the standard. So it doesn't meet the standard, but obviously we think it's a good thing that the weather protection actually covers the entire walkway. But we are required to cover it within the decision. The ground floor wall opening section, that section states that 40% of the ground floor street wall must consist of openings, windows, and doors within of approximately 40%. The three facades that make up the western facade, that 21st Avenue facade that Lauren was talking about earlier, has a combined glazing of just under 20%, 19.4% glazing, and much less than the 40% required. So that decision per the applicant was made. They wanted to limit thermal gain on that side and limit exposure to the less public area, the residential development that's just to the west of the library. But again, the DLC made a recommendation about a way to adjust that, not meeting the 40%, but moving that transparency up to the minimum of 25%. Do you want to?
Was it 35?
The southern facade along Harrison Street has a 35% glazing ratio, which is less than the 40% as well. And so in those instances, we talk about the design guidelines as a way that the building, even though it doesn't meet the specific prescriptive standard, the design intent is met as far as the guidelines, and we'll get to that in a second as well.
So as a committee, when we met, we made recommendations that they increase the percentage of glazing over the facades, the south and the west facade, but that they focus it rather at the northwest facade where the children's reading section was. And if a concern about security or views into the children's reading library, that they consider different opacities or filters or different ways that you could still gain some transparency into the building and break up the solid opaque facade.
The next section is the bottom edge of ground floor windows. So that standard requires that the bottom edge of windows along pedestrian ways are constructed no more than 30 inches above the walkway. The proposed design complies in the majority of areas, except where that finished floor height inside the building is actually higher than the walkway because of the way the building is designed. There's in some sections there's 40 inches rather than 30 inches. That disparity refers to the elevational difference between that finished floor and the sidewalk for maximizing accessibility so that there aren't any stairs or anything into the building. Everything is ramped. So that's why we have a disparity between the finished floor. But you'll see when we talk about the design guidelines that the idea is that, as you're walking, you don't have wall kind of there next to the building. It's transparent and bottom of the windows. But there are definitely sections where it's that 10-inch difference makes very little visual difference, and you're still feeling like you're connected to the building. But we'll talk about that in the design guidelines as well. And then finally, in the standards for roofs, the proposed design has an undulating roof or shed roof design and does not include a parapet wall or a cornice as required in the design standards. So and has varying slopes. No parapet is proposed, and we'll talk about that in the design guidelines as to why that decision was made and why we think it's okay, and way it certainly meets the design intent of the design guidelines as well. But those are the 5 sections in the standards where it does not meet those standards. So when a design does not meet the standard, then what the applicant is required to do is to talk about how that design addresses the purpose statement of the standard, as well as any of the applicable design guidelines. So you have the purpose statements here in front of you for the first, for the building facade details. Again, we're wanting cohesive, visually interesting building. The development addresses that statement by using a glass main entrance as that divider between those 2 wings of the building. The main entry area is at the full building height, so that glass goes all the way to the top, together with the angle of the building, so it's not a flat facade. The feature provides, we certainly, the staff believes, and the DLC agreed, that adequate architectural break in that facade. For weather protection, again, we talked about that. We have a much wider pedestrian walkway. Certainly that weather protection ought to cover the pedestrian walkway. Jump in whenever you want.
Yep, you're good.
Okay.
Great.
All right. In certain areas, as we said, the windowsills are 30 inches above that adjacent walkway as required, and in other areas they're higher. That's to accommodate accessibility as well as to accommodate interior power outlets that are in the building, and to provide a moderate level of privacy immediately adjacent to some staff areas. As far as that west-facing facade facing 21st Avenue, it does have less than the required amount of glazing. But again, we're trying to create a comfortable pedestrian environment with the recommendations that the DLC made about increasing the amount of glazing, even if it's not to the full 40%. We believe that because of where increasing those breaks, if there is any landscaping that they're able to include, and the applicant does have additional materials, and I believe they've made some revisions to that facade to see how they can meet that recommendation from the DLC. The facade uses large windows, native landscaping, so softening of that building adjacent to those walkways. It's addressing that purpose statement, even if it's not meeting that specific number of the glazing. And finally, the roof. The purpose statement is talking about a visually interesting condition of the top of the building. The undulating roof form, rather than a more traditional flat roof, is a much more visually interesting form all in and of itself. No parapet is proposed so that the sculptural form of the building is visible, and it's also to maximize the visibility of the roof-mounted solar photovoltaic panels that are going to be on will be on the building as well. So in addition to the purpose statements, the design guidelines are applicable to these 5 areas as well. And so the findings provide detail for each of those specific things, but we'll kind of go through them sort of a bit more quickly here, just to show how the design does meet the intent of the design guidelines. All right, the first is the Milwaukee Character Guidelines, and the whole notion of this guideline is to reinforce Milwaukee's sense of place, what makes Milwaukee special. The design is oriented to connect the building to both the natural area and with Harrison Street. So the building is moved much closer to Harrison Street than it is now, so there's a direct connection with the street, with pedestrians, with the building. And the design is intended to maximize the relationship with that natural area, with views through the natural area. So it's really accommodating its setting and designing a building for its location and what's around it. It reflects the building's proximity to the creek, connects the building to the natural area. It enhances the setting and really fits it in with the surroundings. The large areas of glazing on the east side to Spring Creek, as well as the areas of glazing where you can actually look through the building from the west side through the building to the east to actually see that natural area. So the building is aligned in such a way to take advantage of its setting, and we think that is precisely what the Milwaukee Character Guideline is trying to do, really connect that building both to its surrounding but to the city as well, and to the downtown. Okay. And this plan just shows kind of the idea of creating this central main entry with the open library, both the adults and the children's library, all around the peripheral. So really taking advantage of that proximity and that connection to that natural area. So any of the office and support function is towards the parking area and kind of to the interior of the site, taking advantage of that surrounding natural environment for any of the reading areas and the open areas for patrons. The pedestrian guideline is pretty simple. Pedestrian is a priority. So how is the design making sure that that's in fact the case? The design includes an access to both the library and to Scott Park. Right now, Scott Park's kind of hidden and sort of behind, and there isn't really a direct connection to that. Having that really wide walkway directly from Harrison Street to the main entrance of the library and then to Scott Park as well really emphasizes the pedestrian coming from the street and coming into onto the site. The existing library entrance is elevated above the sidewalk, as we all know, requiring stairs or a circuitous ramp. This design has that all basically kind of at grade. So the finished floor is essentially flush with that entry walkway. The extra wide pedestrian walkway with that grand wide canopy and native landscaping makes that access way very inviting and very accommodating for pedestrians. And although windows are limited on that western facade to limit that heat gain in the afternoon, the building itself with the panels, and we think there'll probably be some additional openings and so on, and transparency, do afford views to that walkway through the building. And of course, there are benches near the main entry and that larger walkway with supports larger gatherings for folks to connect to the building. And then the architectural guidelines. The goal here is to promote quality development and reinforce the individuality and spirit of Milwaukee. The proposed design does not include a main corner entrance that you might expect at the corner of two streets. But as we were talking about before, it proposes that central entry point mid-block with the large roof high or ceiling high glass area so that various user groups can enter at a single point and then access their library functions from that from their central area. And they don't have to disrupt necessarily other users by trying to get from one space to the other. Everybody's coming in the middle and then going to their areas, including children, adults, and community groups, because there's a community room located right there at that main entry. The design places emphasis on that corner of 21st and Harrison, with very large windows. Open reading area is right there, and is described in the applicant's materials as kind of mimicking a cafe kind of style area. So it's this open glass area, and everyone can really see what's happening inside the building. And it brings that building directly up to the sidewalk at Harrison Street, which is not what the existing library does. The primary wall material is an insulated cedar siding, which is a high performance and a renewable material. And it also reflects the adjacent natural area and relates to that natural area as well. The roof form, again, as we talked about before, is sculptural with that undulating roof shed roof. So that's a really unique roof line that we don't see downtown or here very often. The PV solar panel array, which is sized in accordance with the Oregon's green technology requirements. So the project is participating in the Energy Trust of Oregon's Path to Net Zero program. So from an energy conservation standpoint, the building is designed for extensive use of renewable materials, optimizing daylighting, all of those sorts of things to really make this a really sort of state-of-the-art conservation building, as well as being designed in a way that really fits in with its surroundings. Anything to add?
No, I'll
fired
just,
through that. Sorry.
No, that's great. Very comprehensive. I think as the DLC was discussing the project, I think we were refreshed to see the project because we felt like from many aspects, many perspectives, this project was in its inherent design was a lot of what we intended the guidelines to be used for. So the individuality of spirit of Milwaukee and being something that was kind of a unique structure that was proposed that didn't meet a lot of the prescriptive requirements, but yet in and of its own was kind of a graceful and beautiful design, we felt. Had a lot of other, values to its design that we felt needed to be weighed against whether or not it may have met prescriptive criteria. So we were pleased with the applicant's design.
Second key issue is talking about the modification to the off-street parking requirements, and is that a reasonable request? So again, per the code, the proposed library project at its designed size of 20,000 square feet would require a minimum of 20 and a maximum of 24 parking spaces on the site. However, the park uses are not addressed in the code. And so there's no way to establish, what is that required off-street parking standard. The proposal includes 28 parking spaces, including 2 accessible spaces and 2 carpool spaces per the code. So in order to exceed the maximum number of parking spaces, the applicant has requested that parking modification to allow for that extra 4 spaces, the 28, in order to accommodate use of the park or just account for that there might be other folks there on the site. The existing parking lot serves both the library and Scott Park and has 38 parking spaces. So we're reducing the amount of parking on the site. So the request is a reduction in overall parking on the property and does meet the code requirements. So we think that's a reasonable request, and we do think that it ought to be approved. All right. Key issue number 3 is asking if the proposal adequately addresses impacts to natural resources. And the drawing that you see here on the screen shows the existing site with the existing library, existing parking. The orange outlined area is the habitat conservation area. The green area is the water quality resource area, and then you'll see in that darker, almost black area is the pond itself. The code requires an impact evaluation and an alternatives analysis to determine compliance with the approval criteria in the Natural Resources Code for this discretionary review and to evaluate alternatives to the proposed development. A technical report was prepared by a qualified natural resource professional, and that was included in the applicant's materials. And of course, a variety of components are required in that technical report. The applicant's submittal materials include that technical report prepared by Pacific Habitat Services. The report includes an impact evaluation and an alternatives analysis consistent with the required components. The city's environmental consultant, ESA, provided peer review services for that, and you have their technical memorandum response to that in your materials. And the applicant then submitted response materials to that review, which was also provided as part of the staff report. Both the existing and the proposed buildings are partially located within water quality resource area and mapped HCA. And again, that image here shows the mapped natural resources on the existing site with the existing improvements on the site. What you see here are drawings. The one on the left shows the resource disturbance area as a result of the proposed project. So you see the heavy dark line is showing there's a lot happening on these maps, so I hope it's relatively clear. But you can see the underlying existing improvements on the sites with the proposed building superimposed on top. And you can see then the orange area as the habitat conservation area, and then the green is the water quality resource area. Much of the proposed construction within the mapped resource areas will occur within the footprint of the existing building and the existing parking lot. The existing library, parking lot, walkways, planters, and concrete seating area encroach into the western portion of that WQR. The total existing encroachment into the WQR right now is approximately 5,260 square feet. Construction of the new building and stormwater planters will result in a permanent disturbance, so where there's going to be building or something's going to be there forever, is approximately 1,705 square feet of the water quality resource area and 1,926 square feet of HCA. So that's in addition to what's happening there now. And that's outside the footprint of the existing building and the parking lot. So that's new permanent disturbance on the site. That's approximately 10.5% of WQR and 5.6% of the total amount of the resource area on the site. temporary disturbance to approximately 34 or 3,500 square feet of WQR will occur, as well as approximately 3,200 square feet of HCA, and that's from the construction of the library, but that's a temporary disturbance, and that needs to be restored as part of the mitigation plan. Measures will be taken, and that's all part of the Natural Resources Report and their mitigation plan, to limit that temporary disturbance area to the minimum necessary for the construction of the library. The proposed library was cited specifically to overlap the footprint of the existing building and the parking lot to the extent that they could to minimize the amount of disturbance on the site of these mapped resource areas. Proposed parking areas are located outside of all of those mapped resource areas. The applicant materials talk about tree protection measures such as fencing to prevent impacts to existing trees that will remain within that vegetated corridor. So the drawing on the right shows the proposed mitigation areas. As a result of post-construction installation of 19 trees and 96 shrubs, and that was calculated as part of the mitigation calculations that are laid out in the code. There are a couple of different options for how that gets calculated per square foot of disturbance area. Option 2, or mitigation option 2, was chosen and submitted as part of this plan, which resulted in more plantings than option 1 based on the way that was calculated. The total planting area proposed is 11,367 square feet, which is about 3 times the amount of area that is being disturbed as part of the project. Let's see. The mitigation plan talks about the quantity and size and the ratios of plantings that are being proposed, as well as the fact that all of the species that are proposed are native species. They're identified in our Milwaukee native plant list, and all of that. There's actually quite a bit of man-made debris, noxious materials. There's also invasive species in the area, so part of the mitigation plan includes removal of those items that should not be there, those plants that should not be there. Like I said, including the invasive, non-native and invasive plants are all going to be taken out as part of that whole mitigation plan. And again, the installation of the 19 trees and 96 shrubs, and as well as ground cover and so on, as part of that 11,000 and almost 400 square feet of mitigation area. And this chart summarizes, and maybe I should have started with this instead of going into all of the narrative, the water quality resource area and HCA on the site. So this chart shows you sort of the total existing area that's mapped on the area, or on the site, the current library encroachment in both of those mapped resource areas, the additional encroachment that's being proposed, as well as the total proposed mitigation for the property. The commission has some options in making its decision this evening. You can approve the application with the findings and conditions of approval that were submitted as part of the staff report. You could approve the application and modify the findings and conditions of approval, and we would need to come up with those, obviously, this evening. That would need to be read into the record. You could deny the application upon finding that it does not meet the approval criteria, or you can continue the hearing. So we can continue this discussion. Some of the key recommendations, and that was submitted as a separate exhibit, but some of the key ones that we've identified in the staff report is that the project would be subject to the approval of by the City Council to repeal the Scott Park Master Plan. That still needs to go to City Council, and because that's still a living document and that's still the master plan, we need to make sure that that happens so that this project can happen as well. A photometric plan would be required as part of this to understand what the lighting levels are. That was not included in the application materials, and we want to make sure that that photometric plan meets our guidelines and certainly reduces the amount of lighting that's going into the natural area, and that it's shielded so it's not negatively affecting the residential folks just to the west. We have detailed a condition that's requiring a detailed planting plan and then a subsequent letter confirming compliance with the planting plan, particularly certainly for the mitigation plantings. A construction management plan would be required with root protection zones identified. That was one of the recommendations that came from our peer review consultant from ESA, that would be part of their application materials through the development review process. Redesigning that northern 1/3 of the west-facing wall per the DLC recommendations. The site lighting that the DLC identified within their recommendations, with the ornamental light fixture closest to Harrison, and then that the remaining site lighting could be the contemporary, more modern fixtures. And then finally, that the parking lot design would need to be in compliance with the code, and that was for the dimensions of the parking spaces, or the applicant would need to request a variance to those dimensions. So those are some of the key conditions. I think there are 2 or 3 pages of conditions, but these were the key ones that we thought that we wanted to make sure that we highlighted for the commission. Staff's recommendation is to approve the package of applications, and we recommend that the findings, conditions of approval, and other requirements are made part of that approval vote by the commission this evening. We received comments on the application from the Historic Milwaukee NDA, from Selena Sanford, who's a resident of the residential units just to the west of the library. From Lisa Lashbrook, who's the vice chair of the Parks and Recreation Board, as well as Lisa Gunyon-Rinker. That those comments were left for you on your chairs. Those came in at 9:30 last night, I think. So I want to make sure that you had those as well. Some of the questions and comments from the Historic Milwaukee NDA talked about the building consuming too much of the property, negative impacts to the natural resources, that it visually diminishes the parks and wetlands area, and that the construction process would be very disruptive to the surrounding neighborhoods. Ms. Sanford had comments specifically regarding the bicycle racks, and in the application materials, it wasn't clear how the bike racks actually worked. They looked more like bollards, but the applicant had submitted some additional information, and in fact, they're kind of like a U-shaped. It looks like a bollard, but it's actually U-shaped, so there's a space in between. So once we saw the revised drawings, and we could see that, oh, no, in fact, it is a bike rack, and I sent those drawings over to Ms. Sanford, so she's very clear on what the bike racks are. It was a good request for some additional information. Ms. Lashbrook submitted comments regarding the Scott Park Master Plan and asking for some consideration for the garden area that's adjacent to the children's library. And Lisa Gunyon-Rinker submitted comments mostly focused on the trees that would be removed as part of the project. But again, you have the full set of comments in your package of materials. And that concludes the presentation of the staff report. Happy to answer any clarifying questions. The applicant is here and has a presentation as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for all of that. Does anyone have any clarifying questions for staff? We can start down here. Looks like Commissioner Edge is ready with some questions. Go for it.
So the first question I have regarding the condition to require an application for a variance for the parking lot dimensions, without me looking at the approval criteria for a variance right now, what do you think the chances are of that request meeting the criteria for a variance?
The variance criteria really have mostly to do with impacts on surrounding properties and so on. The parking spaces are designed, again, 6 inches narrower. So to the extent that the case could be made that the parking spaces need to be that narrow, or they can't be the extra 6 inches, I think they would likely be able to make the case. But it's hard to know. That's obviously your
Sure.
decision.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then the ornamental light fixture that was approved, I know that there's conditions in here to not cast any light into the habitat area, the water resource area. What about direct upward facing light pollution? Does it protect against that?
The contemporary fixtures that are being proposed do have a better shedding of light more directly in the downward direction. Actually, the historic acorn fixtures tend to flood light in all directions. I think there's being amendments that are being made to those historic fixtures, but generally speaking, the contemporary fixtures do a better job of providing a night sky atmosphere. Right.
The Public Works Department is in the process of, I think have they gotten approval? Approval to switch out the designs to put a different acorn type fixture in that directs the light downward.
Excellent. I also have questions about the stormwater.
Yes, and our development review engineer is in the audience to answer any of those questions if you'd like. Is this the right time for that?
Should we?
Yeah,
How about we come back?
We can wait
we'll
on that for a minute. Yeah, I just wanted to just be able to come back to it.
Okay. Commissioner Grau?
I don't have any.
No?
I had a question on page 12 and 13 of the staff report. There's a sentence that says that the last sentence of page 12, that energy modeling in the design phase indicates that the proposed building will exceed the National Library average energy use by 70%. Is that intending to say that this would use 70% more energy than the typical library?
No, less.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
It doesn't say less.
It did in my mind when I wrote it. Sorry.
I also had a question. I don't know if this would be better directed at the applicant about the alternatives analysis and the ESA, the city's consultant, asking that an alternative should be looked at for placing the library on a different site in order to avoid the HCA and WQR impacts. And I then saw that the PHS had rebutted and said essentially that the property has to have a library on it or it would revert back to the heirs, the letting heirs. And I wonder if that alternative was looked at in any more depth beyond just that statement, and if that's a question for the city staff or for the applicant, I'm not sure.
I think the applicant would be better able to answer that question as far as the whole design development process and the whole site selection, and I would defer that to them.
Maybe more directly for the city, or is the city aware of who the heirs would be to the site if ownership were to revert?
Yes.
Yes. The city manager is in the audience, and she will be able to answer that question when she comes up. Okay, so can we?
Okay.
But yes, but we do know the answer to that question.
I had a final question about the 21st Avenue, which is not a dedicated right-of-way. It's part of the parcel that the site is on. Is that correct?
A portion of it is right-of-way, and then it's private.
So is there is a dedicated right-of-way for 21st Avenue,
Yes.
and the parcel boundaries are not being changed as part of this development?
Correct, right.
And is there any value that the city would see in the right-of-way width is adequate as it currently stands? Is that correct?
Yes. Alex?
Well,
I believe the...
It's less than, it's like a half right away.
So
The mic here.
It is not a full right-of-way width there, no. And it's actually, it was dedicated as part of the North Main development. So that right-of-way is actually the sidewalk, planter, and then like one travel lane.
So typically in a redevelopment such as this, wouldn't the other half of the right-of-way be deeded to the city?
Generally, it would. It would also require, the design would be a permanent dead end, so it would be a turnaround, and that is not available. It would basically cut into the majority of this development site because the other site has already been developed. There wouldn't be an opportunity for a half cul-de-sac, if that makes sense.
Well, currently there's a turnaround in the parking lot, so I because I don't understand why there would not be right-of-way deeding as part of this redevelopment, and what the city standards would be. That it seems like typically, if it were a commercial development, I would not expect that to be I would have expected more attention to be paid to that, I suppose.
Well, the turnaround that is currently on site would not function how the final right-of-way design would be required. The right-of-way itself would have to be dedicated to accommodate that cul-de-sac.
So what are the standards then on whether a full right-of-way would be deeded under a development such as this?
Some of what's looked at is availability of the right-of-way on the other side, or future dedication. In this case, it's already completely designed or built out. Some of it is length of that right-of-way. Do we want to have this 150-foot long dead end, or do we want to have basically what's already there now, and this functions more of a private driveway? And then that's the stance that we took, is that the site will basically function the same way that it does now.
A couple of years ago, it was removed. It was proposed that 21st be connected to the north, and the council removed that requirement from the code. So 21st is essentially a driveway entrance into the library and into the North Main project. In the past, there was consideration of 21st being built out as a through street.
I'm asking these questions just as with this is a once in a several generation redevelopment project, and whether the parcel boundaries as they exist now should be looked at more closely. And hearing that there's no reason to develop a full right of way, looking the opposite direction, what is the virtue of keeping the half right of way, and would the city deed that back to the parcel if it will never be a full street and just turn it into a private access? Is there a process for that, and is it in the city's interest to say, if we're not going to have a full street, let's change this while we're here?
I guess potentially. It would end up being, like you said, it would be an access easement through the city property to get to the parking lot for the North Main.
So it's the North Main access. That's okay. I think I understand that the half right of way is there for the North Main, and the library side doesn't require any changes. I think that's sufficient. And the final question I had is that, where does Scott Park start and end relative to where the library starts and ends? It's one parcel, one property, and I hear them talked about as if they're two separate things, but I don't know where is the park and where is the library, and is there a meaningful distinction between the two?
The Scott Park Master Plan does not identify a distinction between the library and the park. They both coexist on the property. The Scott Park includes, in addition to the, sorry, I just want to go, whoops, here. So
The parcel to the north.
Yeah, the parcel to the north of the library site is also Scott Park, but the way the Scott Park Master Plan describes the entire area, it talks about the library and the park being on the site. It doesn't draw boundaries or distinguish between what starts where and what doesn't. It's a good question, but as far as the master plan that from 1990 goes, it doesn't talk about them separately. It talks about them together on the site.
Here, the blue rectangle is the parcel, the tax lot that is the park and the library. There's no right-of-way shown outside of the parcel boundary, which you typically see on a map like this. So is this not the assessed parcel boundary?
It is. This is the tax lot.
Why is there no right-of-way for the tax lot?
I don't know that answer.
I don't understand your question.
The overlay is the tax lot boundaries. The data that I know of from assessor doesn't show you right away.
Well, the right of way is usually outside of the tax lot, like we see on Harrison there, where there's no tax lot where the right of way exists. And so,
well, the park includes both that tax lot to the north and the library. So, in essence, the park would have frontage on Harrison and frontage on 21st, because the library and the park, the library is in the park.
The library is in the park, so,
Yeah.
okay.
And if you think back about what the master plan had on it, that's what it describes. And that's part of the reason we were having conflicts with the master plan.
So when the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District says that this is a 2.6 acre park, are they including?
I'm sorry?
They're including that northern parcel as well.
Well, I'm sorry, the park itself is if they call the park 2.6 acres, are they including the library parcel? Yes, they are.
Yes, yeah.
How would we separate, for trip generation calculations, how would we separate that out to look at what demand on the transportation system the park is putting versus the library?
I don't think we have trip calcs that we do for parks.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah, it would, you'd have to have a much modified, or a further modified park design to really start looking at kind of what kind of trip generation it has. I mean, I think the undeveloped, mostly undeveloped northern parcel is not really going to have a calc associated with it.
Okay.
And you'll see that same question come up at the next meeting when we're looking at the school district ball fields.
Okay.
That's probably enough questions on the matter. I just would ask that the city consider if there's any virtue in looking at where the lot lines are and the parcels are, that through this redevelopment better distinguishing what is the library from the park. That I don't have a specific question or recommendation. It just kind of entered my mind, like trying to understand the site, whether there's a differentiation between the two and where the property boundaries are.
So when there was discussion with the DLC, I have two questions. So is there any worry about the way that, now I'm directionally challenged, so bear with me. The south side corner goes almost directly to the sidewalk, and the issue of vehicle traffic not being able to see pedestrians crossing the street or any blockage of that? Does it, and I don't see any diagram that tells me how close that corner actually comes to the sidewalk.
There was no concern about whether or not pedestrians could be seen because the building is actually off, and we felt like there was enough area there for view lines to come through that was not a concern that we discussed.
Okay. And then was there any discussion about sunshine and sun fade of the product inside the building with more open transparency of windows? Would that cause curtains or shading to be implemented so that you did not sun fade the product inside?
That's outside of the jurisdiction of the DLC. However, as an architect, I think that's a reasonable concern to take, but not anything that we were overly concerned with.
So
we were happy to see the transparency and actually wanted more transparency. So
right. So the question is that there was no discussion about if more transparency would cause product fade.
There wasn't actually. The idea is, as it was described as a cafe corner, providing as much transparency as possible. We wanted to actually make sure that we didn't see any curtains or shading that would make that facade any more opaque than it is. So the contrary, we would like to see more. And we're not overly concerned with fading.
Okay. I'm done with my question.
Okay. All right.
I don't have any questions.
I have a question about At one point, I thought there was a city advisory committee for the library, and but I wasn't really tracking it very closely. So I was wondering if you could speak to who was on that committee, if it existed, and how long they met, and if we're hearing from any of those people in the comments, or just not sure.
I'm going to have Leila Aman answer that question.
Maybe they can address it during their testimony. Is that okay?
The applicant staffed the committee, or did the city staff the committee? Or I guess, can you tell me a little bit about, like, were they appointed, or?
Yeah.
It was the city's committee.
Yeah, let's let them address it as part of their presentation since they're still coming up.
Is the applicant, right?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Great. And then, will they talk about the open house and other things? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And then I had a question, I guess, along the lines of the thinking about the distinction between, or knowing that the library is in the park. And then just to explain a little bit about, so there's no parking standards for parks.
Correct.
And that's just across the board, not just in downtown. We have no parking standards for parks.
The parking quantity table, 605, does not have a park category, so it's not covered. So that's why the parking modification was required, because all we have is the library. We have a standard for that.
Okay.
Absent a standard for the park, we're exceeding the library standard, so that's how we decided to treat it, that we would have an actual application to modify that standard to allow for the 4 additional spaces, so that the site has 28 spaces for the library and the park.
Right.
But there is not a parking quantity standard for parks, no.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I wasn't sure if it was just in the downtown that there's no park.
Everywhere.
It's across the board.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With respect to the mitigation plan, so does the total planning area proposed, is that 3 times the area of permanent disturbance, permanent new disturbance, or permanent total disturbance?
It's 3 times the permanent new, as well as the temporary disturbance as well.
So then, is there any requirement as far as because I know that in a lot of cases, it's just the delta between, the current disturbance and the new disturbance.
Right.
Does that change with respect to the fact that the building is being completely removed and redeveloped?
The mitigation plan in the natural resources report is required to talk about existing disturbance, proposed disturbance, but the code doesn't talk about kind of pretending that existing disturbance doesn't happen, and then we move forward from there. It really is about the delta, and what quality of area is also being disturbed. So, so within the report, it talks about good and marginal and so on as far as that goes as well. But they were calculating the delta as well as the temporary disturbance as part of that calculation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, we were going to get back to stormwater. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So now that Alex is sitting there, why don't we go ahead and ask those clarifying questions before we move on to the applicant?
So I was hoping that you could speak to the questions that I had for staff over email, which was relating to the very high pre-development curve numbers that we're seeing in the report, and how we would apply conditions to ensure that they're complying with the approval criteria, and how that's affected by the city code that you brought up as well.
Yep. For pretty much every development that we've had in quite a while, there's a good infiltration on site, and they can either satisfy hierarchy 1 or 2, so basically infiltrate everything on site. Usually that sets a default number of 72 for the curve number, and it hasn't been an issue or a conflict is what we have in our code, where our public works standards says that they need to match existing conditions. And then everywhere else in our document, it mentions that the design for the facilities themselves reference Portland Stormwater Manual. Up until this point, it hasn't been an issue because every site has had good infiltration. With this site having poor infiltration in the high water table, is the first time that this has showed up where technically they can follow our public works standards that addresses specific language saying existing conditions that they have to match. So I think that is something that we can modify in the future. We are modifying our public works standards right now anyway, so that will get addressed.
And so for purposes of this application, the pre-development curve numbers of 98 are appropriate.
Or 95, I think, yeah.
I mean, it depends on which page you're looking at, which stormwater catchment area that they're describing. But the pre-development numbers essentially match the post-development numbers, and so you're saying in this case that is allowed by the city code, by the public works standards.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And why is it that the public works standards apply for the library? Is that just any if this were a private development, would those same standards apply?
Yeah, like I said, it hasn't been an issue yet of the conflict between them, because with hierarchy 1 and 2, you can't change that, at least with the PAC calculator, you can't change that pre-number. So they're already set to that Lewis and Clark, lower runoff. It's not something that we're modifying because it is a city project. The engineer brought it to our attention that is what it says in our public works standards. So we do have to allow that to be followed.
Okay.
Save it for deliberation.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items included in the meeting packet?
Just the comment from Lisa Gunyon-Rinker that was included and left on your tables today.
Okay, we'll move on to applicant testimony. Comments from the applicant or their representative.
Good evening, Chair Travis, Commissioners. My name is Layla Aman. I'm the Development Manager for the City of Milwaukee, and I am also the Project Manager for the Letting Library Project.
And I am Ann Ober. I am the City Manager of Milwaukee. We actually are going to be stepping back in a few minutes, but you had some questions, and so we wanted to start our presentation off with answers to those questions before we move on.
Great. And the first thing you actually asked the question, one of the things I did want to cover is sort of an introduction of the community outreach that's been a big part of this project. And first of all, I wanted to acknowledge that we have a really dynamite team on the staff level that has been engaging with our architecture team to design a library that suits the needs of the library. First and foremost, Katie Newell, who is our library director, has been supported by Nancy Wittig and Jana Hoffman, who are librarians and have really contributed to the interior design and how the library functions. I also want to acknowledge Haley Fish, who has also been project managing this up till I took over the project and has really provided a lot of leadership to get us here, and as well as Ann Ober, as well as our city manager. So first and foremost, we have a library task force, you mentioned that, and we have met throughout the project, consulting with them, both on the design and as well as the community outreach component of that. To give you some sense of who they are, it's a 10-member task force that led by and chaired by Angel Falconer, one of our city councilors. Mayor Mark Gamba is on that committee as well. Ryan Healy, Rebecca Banyas, Ernestina Fuenmayer, pardon me if I've mispronounced that, Paul Klein, Julie Lund, Irvin Miller, Melissa Perkins, and Nancy Tice. And I believe they're all residents of Milwaukee, but for Irvin Miller, who is
a district representative. So our boundaries and the library boundaries actually don't coincide fully. So the service boundary is about double the population of Milwaukee.
So they have been consulted throughout this process. We met with them prior to going to City Council, and we've also held 3 community open houses where we solicited feedback from the public, and that feedback has been incorporated into the design to the greatest extent practicable. We have another community meeting on April 24th, assuming approval, and we will be showing them the design. So that will not be a feedback opportunity, but more of an opportunity opportunity to show what the final design was. So to really report back to the community on the library itself, both in terms of its design, as well as where we are in terms of the financing and the construction timeline and the move. As you know, the library will be moving temporarily to a site on Main Street in a modular unit to operate during the time of construction. So those are the major points of communication we've had with the community.
And then another point that was brought up by you, Commissioner, was about whether or not what kind of homework we did about the site and the deed restrictions placed on the site. So originally we looked at a number of things for the site. We actually looked at whether or not we should put affordable housing on the upper floors and build like a 4 or 5 story building to try and meet our needs. The feedback that we received from our attorney is that that was not allowed under the deed restriction that had been placed on the property. So we also looked at whether or not just turning over to a park and making the whole thing a green space would somehow meet the demand. But because it was so specific in the stipulations that it needed to be for a library, we decided that this site was the best and only site that we really wanted to utilize. We looked at even co-locating it with some other things, and we just couldn't justify losing that kind of space so close to downtown. A couple of pieces around that, though, to think about. One is that when we started this conversation in 2013, we were actually looking at a 32,000 square foot building on this site. This square footage has been reduced to 20,000. So if we had built the fully designed or fully anticipated building, we would have either been looking at multiple stories just for library use, or you couldn't have fit it. You physically could not have fit it onto the site. There are stipulations. There are 2 deed restrictions we're actually talking about tonight. One is on Scott Park, and one is from the Letting family. The Scott Park family has been very involved in this process and has been attending some of our public meetings and making sure that everyone understands that that is a park and that it is not to be used for anything else. And I actually really appreciate them doing that. They continue to defend the reasons that it was contributed to the city, and I think that's really awesome. The Letting family, you asked specifically for names, and I have not done any additional due diligence to try and track down heirs. What we did look at is time frame. So the issue that I have come up against, and this was going to be the end of the presentation, it's now your beginning, is that between when this was first discussed in 2013 to 2015 and then 2015 to 2017, each of those years, the cost per square foot of new construction has gone up by $50 for a government agency. So that means that when we started this, it was about $100 less per square foot than it is today. That's part of why we've had to reduce the square footage of the building so much. I am hearing that those numbers are continuing. I met with a city manager from a neighboring city this last week. He was given a quote for another $100 more a square foot in the next 2 years. His, I'm going to grant, was for a police facility, so I am taking off about $20 to $30 per square foot from that. But you're still seeing increases comparable, if not higher, than what we're seeing right now for construction costs. So part of the reason that we have been so quick is that we have to get this done if we're going to be able to hit our budget numbers. And we've been short. Part of why Commissioner Hemer was asked to participate in a meeting with me was to try and add in some components we had to remove from the construction of the design, simply because we don't have sufficient revenue due to the construction escalations that we're seeing. So I don't know if she has a family member, but I do know that I could end up in litigation. And part of my goal has been to avoid litigation and to make this go as quickly as possible. Are there any other questions that we did not answer before we turn this over to the architectural firm?
Sorry, I did have a follow-up. You talked about the distinction between the Letting family and the Scott family. I'd heard earlier that the library is within the park, but what you said seems to imply that they are...
So for legal purposes, they are separate. And I would have to look at what the actual deed statement said for what the parcels were at the date. I have made the assumption that it is the northern portion of the park that was actually deeded by the Scott family, and that the southern portion was deeded by the Lettings. So that's how I have been treating them through this process, but I have not done any additional legal research to tell you one way or the other. I can tell you that when the Scott family has come to some of our meetings, that they have been very protective of the areas that are currently green space that are to the north of the building, and making sure that those amenities continue to exist. When we were doing the design, we were really cautious not to lose the amphitheater or some of those other components that are the only design components of the park at this time.
So those design components are on the property that was deeded by the Lettings and not the property that was deeded by the Scotts?
I believe so, but I can't legally tell you that that is the case. That is how I have been treating them, simply because they are on this side of that boundary line. I'm making the assumption, but I have not gone back to do a specific recorded deed, and I'm looking to my city attorney because he's also your attorney. And I don't believe he has looked at those definitions either. We can do further research if you guys are interested in that. But what I have not had is the Scott family tell me that if we do this design, that they will fight us due to their donation of the property as a park. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Well, I think we're going to hand it over to the design team. We have Tyler Nishitani today and Scott Manhard, who are with Hacker Architects. And I also want to acknowledge Laura Klinger, who has been a big part of this team as well, working with our librarians to design us an excellent library. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the architecture team.
Welcome. If you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, my name is Scott Manhard with Hacker Architects at 733 Southwest Oak. We just moved.
1615 Southeast 3rd. Much closer to you guys now.
All right. Autopilot response there. It's okay.
I'm Tyler Nishitani from Hacker as well.
Able to begin?
Yep,
okay.
Go ahead. Thanks.
First of all, Tyler and I are thrilled to be here presenting the project and discussing it with you all. It's been an amazing opportunity for us. And I'm really glad that Vera and Layla recognized the team that was involved, because while we have the honor of representing the design, it was definitely a team effort. So that's great. Just wanted to acknowledge that off the bat. And also, we are going to try really hard to be succinct and not repeat in much information, if at all, if we can, that in the thorough introduction that Vera gave. So we'll try. This slide is here for the team. This slide we put in, everybody knows what the site is, where it's been from the introduction. However, we included it because of the amazing design opportunity this site affords. It's both once in a downtown urban environment and in a park with a very interesting organic edge to it. And to us, this represented a really interesting design opportunity and definitely influenced our approach to the design. This is a site survey. We just included it to just establish the existing conditions and to show that all of our plans will be north being to the left of on the screen left here. Okay, this is the one slide that I might read verbatim because I just want to make sure I get it right, and so they won't all be like this, I promise. So when we did a deep dive into analyzing the existing building to determine suitability of renovation, and also looking at its two-story nature, and so these bullet points represent all of the parameters we were considering in coming to a conclusion of a one-story library, and in that top statement was Milwaukee will get more library for its money with the one-story complete improvement option compared to a two-story representative is our conclusion. And here's a few items why. So in terms of resiliency and performance, the piecemeal construction of the existing library is very difficult to seismically upgrade for modern earthquake resistance. The current library uses twice the national average of a library in energy use consumption, like looking at at its bills, and 4 times the current energy code. So we wanted to also improve operating costs and sustainability because it's a huge component of Milwaukee's vision going forward. Okay, a one-story library is most flexible to the changing needs of modern libraries, so that no program needs to be upstairs where floor area adjustments are physically limited. And with one-story space, like partitions adjusting within the library footprint as needs change over time, are more easily accommodated when there aren't a permanent barrier of a floor, a second floor, I should say. So also, the library is more universally accessible to everyone. So elevators and stairs do provide code-compliant accessibility, but they are still a type of barrier to overcome for children, elderly, strollers, and people who don't handle stairs well. Oh, I said strollers there. Library carts also, function. 2 stairs plus an elevator represent roughly 1,000 square feet, and these are required expenses of a multi-level library. So therefore, one-story library without these requirements gives the team more flexibility to make budget adjustments to meet the space needs. From a management side, one-story library provides easier supervision of the entire library, and National Library Design best practices recommend one-story libraries until a library hits 50,000 square feet. So, and with a one-story library, we get the library interior spaces engaging more of this natural asset of it being the park setting. One-story libraries are easier to get daylight and usable daylight to occupants in the interior spaces. And one thing that did come up in community meetings and from the library staff is that acoustics are really important, and they currently can separate the children's area from the adults via a floor area, which is the ultimate acoustic separation. But we solve this all the time with other types of partitions and distance, like from quiet spaces to more boisterous spaces of children. So we will show how we kind of address that issue in the one-story library too. Okay. So given all of those parameters, we also want, whenever we come into a community and design with them, we're always looking to connect it to place. And so we wondered if taking inspiration from the waterways, the landscape that the people of Milwaukee all share together, could give us a clue to how to have all these parameters navigate the natural features of the site if we just let it have kind of a more fluid shape to the plan. And so that's where these diagrams come into play. You see, you've seen a few of these when in Vera's introduction, but I want to just touch on a couple other aspects of it. So, so again, shape the footprint to navigate the natural features. So this diagram here shows the outline of the proposed library, and this dotted outline is the existing library, and this is the parking lot here. Our first move on the site, design move, was to pull the parking back from the pond as much as possible and spread it along the length of the facade. This is very similar to the Main Street head-end parking arrangement replicating that on this street. So that allowed room for the library to occupy what was formerly parking and take advantage more of the linear nature of the views of the site. I will say also that these dark bars represent the enclosed spaces of the library, the reading rooms, the community rooms, the restrooms, but also staff offices and other things like functional utility rooms and other core elements. So this edge of the site of the library, pulls back. When we decided not to make a rectilinear shape and free it up to make kind of this river bend plan is what we're calling it. That allows us to give just the right amount of recommended berth to the really big oak tree on Harrison, and then also take advantage of this natural break right here that we have the best view of the pond right between these two trees as kind of an apex of the entry sequence in the view, right, to greet people who arrive, right, and look right out into that great view. And that forms the kind of the extent of the existing library. And then to try and get this building shape back out of the water quality resource line as soon as possible, it has another tapered edge to it here too. So when you look at the space program, or the way we allocated the space, we wanted to wrap around, because we have this urban condition too, this prominent street corner, we wanted to wrap this open reading room depicted by the white space here in the floor plan diagram, wrap it all the way around the park as much as possible, and then have the more contained spaces be more of a building core, if you will. But the challenge of having a site that has 360 degrees of things to respond to, not simply just a street face. We have a 360-degree environment to design on. We had to allocate windows in an intentional way and not a random way. And so we are allowed, about 40% of your building facade to be glass, between 30 and 40% for Oregon Energy Code. So we wanted to maximize the opportunities that this site have in locating where those windows occur. And so this diagram with these blue bars indicate how we thought about composing the facade, in which the windows for energy conservation are narrowed but still present along the big west exposure that gets the low angle hot sun, recognizing that this is now an important and direct pedestrian connection to Scott Park. There's one thing that this kind of linear arrangement did that the old library design did not have a direct pedestrian connection. That's established right here in this diagram. And so all along this path, we wanted to create visual interests and have, maybe they're a little smaller in width in openings and a smaller glazing percentage on that pedestrian side, but they align with windows opposite on the pond side, and they expand. So when you enter, say, in the middle of the library, your view expands to this asset of the trees in the park. That also happens to provide the shade required for the dappled light and the shaded light, and that's why we wanted to provide the glazing there for environmental reasons too, not only view. And so, again, strong connection, visual connection at the street corner, and then periodic and frequent views for pedestrians into the library and through the library to the park. So all of these site factors resulted in this site plan here that shows how it lays in the park. These spaces right here are the only spaces that are 8'6" in this diagram wide. They're right here. These
just the north 10.
The north 10s. Thank you, Tyler. The north 10 are the ones that are 8'6". The rest of them are 9 feet to here. Maybe a word is that if you did pick up 6 inches per space through here, it would simply come out of this landscape island, and then this entry plaza here could get a little bit narrower too. But we've designed what we think is the appropriate, not only window allocation, but also parking allocation and landscape allocation on this. And then this area of landscape shows kind of a minimal approach until the Scott Park master plan gets fully planned and realized. The building floor plan I'll just walk through quickly, but you saw in the original diagram is that we're converging everybody, whether you're a pedestrian or cyclist coming from downtown on foot or by bike, or if you are parking a car, a centralized entrance helps us bring everybody to the same spot, no matter arrival sequence. It also helps us keep the library, due to the grades that slope down to Harrison. It allows us to get a floor level that is level throughout, so we don't chew up any space within the library itself for ramps or stairs. So it provides equitable access. And then it also allows, as Vera noted, a chance to go to the children's wing or the adults wing, neither the children having to pass through the adults wing or vice versa on their way to their destination. Oh, I should say, go ahead.
Community room.
Yeah, okay. Just a couple key spaces. There's a conference room here. Here's the teen room. acoustically separated and programmed just for teens, but also on this public walkway. This is the staff area right here, this administration. There's a staff entrance and a book drop right here near the main entrance. The restrooms are here, the Friends of the Library bookstore here in the main entry lobby. Here's the community room, front and center here too, and then with great access to the restrooms. There's some storage and support spaces backing for that community room right here. This is staff administration for the children's area. And some more support spaces here, trash enclosure is within the building. And then here's the kids' reading area back here. So it's back where the open library reading room wraps around the end here too. Okay, so not only did that kind of waterway inspiration influence the plan, but we were also looking for a way to incorporate that inspiration into the form of the building itself. And we thought, and not in an arbitrary way, but in a way that actually functions and got you something for functional or experiential about the library. So this diagram shows how the undulating roof accentuates certain aspects of the site. So for example, if you start on the Harrison side, it's the lowest point here, and that allows that kind of major oak trees canopy to spread out over and kind of dominate that portion of the site. And then it rises, the roof rises then to provide a window both into the library to see library use happening and people in there and that, but also from the library to view out towards the other civic building and the diagonal with City Hall to create that civic connection. And then we know that normally that's where you would have in downtown design guidelines a corner entry, but for the reasons we have the entry located mid-block. The roof continues to a high point here, and that's a visual cue demarcating entry at the high point. So it builds to this, and then diminishes back, it diminishes back down low, not only to let Scott Park's North End open up visually, but that also happens to be the children's reading room, and it drops in scale to a more kind of intimate, appropriate scale to the people of that size. So in that entrance, though, you could see that there's a ridge line that stays high, and that's that break in the trees for that dramatic view of both the forest, the tree canopy, and the pond. And then it dips down a little bit as there's a threshold into the children's area through that quiet through the acoustic barrier, say, it's lowest, and that's a way to both bring the scale down to the children's height, but also when you're doing a glass wall separation, it's the most expedient way to get the most cost-effective way to get separation if that's a little lower. But then the back corner tips back up towards that amphitheater and expands the view again there. So this is how, this is now on the curve of Harrison. This is a rendering from that view. And this shows how that kind of undulating roof plays out over the length of the building. It's not wavy or choppy. It's just more of a kind of a graceful rising and falling over its length. So now I want to just focus in on some key elements. We're going to just walk around and do a few vignettes and talk about how each of these elements are composed around the building. This little red arrow indicates the view we're going to take in the subsequent image. So right at the beginning, we wanted to establish kind of a gateway into Scott Park and the library, even if our library entrance couldn't be at that location. And also, due to that low point in the roof, we are collecting water at that point, just by the shape of the roof, and that is expressed in a stormwater filtration garden right at the beginning. So it's a real active and forward presentation of living in a watershed, showing how this building manages and filters water for quality.
Greg, to address your question as well, this shows where the face of the building is. It's kind of protected away from the edge of the sidewalk by that planter.
It's not completely parallel to the back of the sidewalk. It opens up a little bit there. Yep. And so this is the view from the crosswalk here. So that stormwater planter forms, about a seat wall height there, so it could be used, to perch there if you like. But here's this gateway, that feeling that we wanted to provide in lieu of having our entrance doors right there on the corner. And that, what contributes to that is not only the generous overhang, but also kind of the way the colonnade is supported, and with the columns there too. And around the building, you're going to see how the siding becomes more of a wood screen. And this is how we wanted to provide like a dappled light and a shade and shadow articulation as you enter the park. The same feeling that you would get if you're under a tree in a park, for example, is the kind of the ideal library in the park experience, or reading in the park experience.
The canopy gains width as you go across, and that's carefully crafted to shade from southern light during the warmer summer months. The screen is there to provide additional shading when the screen isn't quite thin enough, but as it wraps around to the west, it provides a good amount of shading for that kind of mid-afternoon western sun along that southern portion of the west facade.
Because we're not only interested in protecting for solar gain, but we're also, from an energy point of view, but we just wanted to make a nice reading room there, so to control glare and to provide that kind of shaded light. Okay, so we're going to move on down that covered walkway towards the main entrance, and that's where we've show just a more generous kind of plaza and gathering area at the crosswalk of the existing sidewalk of the multifamily development across the way, and at the main entrance. So this is where groups can queue and gather and rest, waiting for a pickup or waiting to assemble, waiting for the library to open. So it has both covered and uncovered areas, so it's that generous overhang. So you have covered bike parking and some additional bike parking uncovered, and some bench seating and some landscaping. And so here's where we're showing both types of fixtures. So the Acorn traditional fixture is located out at the street face on Harrison, and then the more modern design, the one that's dark sky compliant and shielded fixture LED that's downlight, carefully controlled downlight, is for the interior. And this is the best way to get the most efficient lighting without disturbing the residents or the park. And we can meet the lighting foot candle requirements of 0.5 foot candles with this fixture. And it also, it kind of it's compatible with some of those column elements of the building design, really designed to just kind of be minimal and not get the light without seeing the fixture, for example. And so here's that vignette view of the main entrance of the building. And so you see lots of glass inviting you in here. Just right to left here, here's the book drop that feeds directly into the staff room and the staff entrance. And then this really says that this is the main public entrance here. And this is a view into the community room. So you can see the chairs aligned right here. So the community room does have a significant window and view into the interior there. And then this other window is the back edge of the community room, and also the second means of egress from that room that's required. Okay, and then moving down to the north end, this again represents a pretty minimal approach to the landscape on the interface of the north end of Scott Park. We have a stormwater swale that to help to treat the water, filtrate the water that comes off the low point of the roof right here. So it goes into a visible trench drain, but flush with the ground. And there is a curved path that provides provides paved access to the amphitheater. There is proposed new ADA compliant bench seating for the amphitheater served by this path here. This path represents a means of egress required for the library from a building code standpoint, but also a direct path for bringing children out in a controlled way, escorted by library staff, to programming that could occur in the outdoor amphitheater. And so this is the view of standing at kind of the end of the walkway before you enter that grassy area of Scott Park. At the north end of the building, there's that curved path here. And this is looking kind of at the children's end of the interior program and the path back to the main entrance there. Okay, other building elevations, these are more analytical building elevations drawings. This is that flat 2D drawing of that elevation here. And here is the south elevation at Harrison. We wanted to include a building section. Here is kind of design explanation material, because this shows how the undulating roof works. At some points it's low to create intimacy, and like I said, underneath that big oak canopy. And then by the time it gets to the north end, that roof has undulated and reversed itself to provide a low area for the children's reading area, intimate, with a big view to the park. And this curvilinear form of the roof, this undulated, is made up of straight structure. So it's a way of arriving at a visually interesting design out of a pretty conventional way of building. And so you can see this up here shows the proposed west elevation along the parking side. And this shows the entire east elevation on the pond side. And as you can see, here's where you can really clearly see how we've carefully chosen to distribute more glass on the shaded side with the views and less glass on the west side. There still is a cohesive rhythm of openings or attitude towards openings around the entire building. We're treating this as kind of one whole building of form that varies depending on its aspect and the site features that it's trying to enhance the experience of. So this is where you can see some of the percent glazing. So this is 21.6%. We'll get into this. We're going to address visually a few of the non-compliant standards point by point here in just a minute. And this is where this shows it at 50% glazing. So the exterior materials, as we're proposing to clad it in stained cedar, and so vertically oriented. And this also shows stained cedar louvers to create that dappled light effect inspired by the trees in the park setting. This is the exterior wood soffit under the overhang, the canopy as you walk up. We did not stain, we're not proposing to stain this dark because it is less susceptible to UV degradation under the roof, and it just provides a lighter atmosphere underneath there. And so we've used wood siding in a number of projects in Portland and in the Northwest. We have a few good rules of thumb for making it a long-lasting, durable material, because we are encouraged to use wood. It's a renewable material. It's a material of place and of this region. And so what we do is we stain it with semi-solid, semi-opaque, as another way of saying it, stain, so the wood character can still read through, but you get the pigments that help protect it against UV degradation. Hold it 10 inches off the sidewalk, and just that 10-inch black, that base that we're showing in black helps eliminate any negative effect from rain splashing on the concrete and going back onto that. We've analyzed a number of buildings, including our own around Portland, and come up with that rule. And then, of course, everyone installs wood siding in a rain screen application, and that's in order to let ventilation occur behind the wood siding to discourage any kind of moisture being trapped back there behind the siding, so leading to any kind of rot. The other, it's a very simple material palette. The other material that we're working with, well, we have black fiberglass windows, the fiberglass frame. It's virtually indistinguishable from, say, an aluminum system, but it performs thermally so much better. The size of openings and operability of openings are the same. It's very strong, but it is not nearly as thermally conductive as aluminum, and so we really like it for this project. It's helping to contribute to our really good energy performance. And then, so for areas that aren't wood, we have a black metal panel that goes below it. So it's supposed to kind of merge with the window openings to provide kind of cohesive, kind of floor to ceiling feeling windows. I'm going to turn it to Tyler to talk about a few of the sustainable features of the project.
So I wanted to revisit the slides regarding the footprint of the building, and I wanted to highlight a couple of the features that I don't think we discussed really thoroughly. First and foremost, we tried to limit the amount of new disturbance into the natural resource areas, and we also wanted to look at specific trees on the site, particularly the line of heritage oaks that you kind of see are dotted along the pond. Most notably, the large one on the south corner. You can see there I've got two circles, which are rules of thumb in terms of avoiding root disturbance. That inner circle is the critical root zone, and these are derived by the trunk thickness. Our arborist report documents this. But basically, you want to keep your building footprint out of that critical root zone, so you can see that we've done that. And then with the broader root zone, you want to encroach in no more than 25%, which the building also does. So by a rule of thumb, we should be in good shape. Now, to take it a step further, we wanted to be extra sure that we were going to preserve this particular tree and the trees along that edge. So we've hired an arborist with the intent to air spade the perimeter of the building to identify any accumulation of roots so that we can adjust the foundation design of the building to accommodate those accumulations. To touch on energy performance, Vera noted that this building is participating in Energy Trust Path to Net Zero. So we're really targeting two categories. First is to get our energy use down as much as possible. And that starts with having an extremely well-insulated building. As Scott mentioned, fiberglass windows. We've got 4 inches of continuous insulation in the walls, almost 9 inches in the roof assembly. So it's a really tight building. That's made even more efficient by a radiant floor slab, which services all the public areas. It's a really nice, natural form of heat, and with a library that has predictable hours of use, it's really easy to make sure that that's comfortable. And then on the other side of it, we do have some on-site generation. You can see here with the red outline indicates the rough area where we have enough sun on the site. As you can imagine, there's a good amount of shade with the trees on the east side, but our solar feasibility analysis showed that that's the area, so you can see where we've accumulated those PV panels, and we really want to push them to that western edge so they'll begin to peak out above the roof line and be visible.
It is worth noting that just because of the heating and cooling system that we have selected in pursuing these aggressive energy goals, we do not have, other than the photovoltaics, we do not have any rooftop HVAC equipment visible. So that was another, we could get to that when we're talking about parapets can shield rooftop equipment, and we just don't have any with this design. So, okay.
This is a quick snapshot of some EUI comparisons. The far left, the large one, the 146, is the existing building. And our
say what EUI is.
Oh, yeah, sorry. The EUI is an energy use intensity. It's a way to measure energy use regardless of building type or square footage. Our engineer joked that there's some other building plugged into the existing building feeding off it because they don't know how an UI that high was possible. Then you can see the national average. Next down is what a code minimum, or I guess code maximum energy use would be. And then you can see where our current modeled library is, and that meets the 2030 goal and is in alignment with the Energy Trust of Oregon's Path to Net Zero. And that benchmark is set by 70% less than the national average. With our PV system, on top of the 23, we're looking at about a 17 EUI. So we're still, it's kind of a fuzzy number with how much the PV system is going to generate, but it's remarkably low. This is just some equivalents for fun to kind of give you a sense of what the 146 EUI does on an annual basis, what its equivalencies are.
Okay, so this is the last portion of our presentation, and we'll be done. We just wanted to address each standard individually and put some supporting material and a little explanation of why we arrived at the solution that we are proposing. This is the building elevation that was presented to the DLC. And so we had already showed you our proposed one that post DLC, that was what we just presented, but we're going to look at it in more detail. And as you can see, we did get some great feedback about how to, some of the opportunity to like improve this particular elevation. And a portion of the elevation, excuse me, we were presenting a 19.4% glazing percentage on the parking lot here. And so that was due to the reasons when I walked everyone through the plan, is that we had some support spaces and back of house spaces that were there. Oh yeah, as indicated by the shaded areas, not regularly occupied. So what we did in order to improve this elevation is we reconfigured the floor plan to broaden the regularly occupied, daily occupied spaces on this facade, and that increased the width of the children's staff area room, and just tried to work to consolidate our mechanical and support spaces to the minimum they need to be for this. And so that produces an elevation where we added one whole window here in staff area and broadened the window into the children's area. Now, and we also broadened the window right here on the north-facing facade of the children's area, because while it isn't a facade, like a west facade only, it still does participate in the pedestrian experience, which we'll show you here. We are sensitive to the proximity of the children's reading area to the front of parked cars. So what we're proposing here is we didn't get as a whole to the recommended 20, add 5% at 24.6% glazing for the facade. We wanted to propose the right windows for the reconfigured spaces, and then look at some other suggestions that came from the DLC meeting, like layer on landscape to soften the edge a little bit, and just provide more facade articulation. Like, for example, this doorway into the water room is a steel door, doesn't need to be transparent, but we gave it that black metal treatment, so it gave it visual depth. It continues kind of the vertical rhythm that the window openings do provide, to kind of just cut down on the kind of expanse or the monotony of one material without a break. And so we were working with some tools already in our palette to increase the kind of visual depth and articulation for the pedestrian on this. And so here's what I mentioned about including landscape zone here. and here. And these are great because they actually allow us to plant the zones right outside the regularly occupied spaces. So it's nicer from the interior inhabitants as well. And we can use and because, like we just talked about an aggressive energy model, that is dependent on shade of our glazing. So what we'll do is if we increase western exposure, we also want to increase western shade. So in here, that allows us to put some trees in that can thrive in this kind of environment as a way of also shading the increased area that we just added. And so that's what you will see you can see them here. It's better shown here, basically. So we did try and soften this edge where there wasn't the canopy or the recess, or 40% glazing to provide kind of a visually interesting, kind of more park pathway rather than a straight shot along there. And then we did look at wrapping the children's reading area corner window around, kind of like we did at the urban corner, but it wasn't exposing a dynamic urban intersection and visual diagonal view to a civic building. It was just kind of increasing the exposure and disturbance of headlights and things. So what we were just hoping we could just expand the width of this to provide more, interest visually, but still screen the cars. And so that shows a relationship, now a glazing percentage of 21.6 on this facade. This one remained, at 51%. Now, if we did look at if we needed to hit that 25% or to add that 5% as a condition of approval. And what that would mean is changing, instead of having 2 windows, for kind of optimal arrangement for the interior of the admin space, you just make this all window. And then you would widen the view into the children's area just further. And in our mind, this increases thermal liability and actually introduces a little bit more glare control needed for the office without really measurably, maybe this is part of deliberation and discussion, without appreciably changing, improving the facade. So we did look at what it took to do it, and we just kind of scale back to this kind of more appropriate, like we feel a little bit more appropriate aperture size and distribution of windows. Okay, and then
I'm sorry, could you flip back to that slide? So does your 21.4%, is that just glazing?
Yeah.
Or does that include the black metal part above the door?
It's just the window units.
Okay, so how much, if you were to add that little black metal part against the door, do you know how much that would add in?
Oh, are you talking about like?
Yeah.
That dark black represents the, do you have an estimation, Tyler? Did you say?
Does it add in 1%, 2%, 0%?
Well, yeah. Are you asking just if we modified the calculation or expanded the glass?
My question comes it's meant to break up the blandness of the facade, so you made that attempt.
Yeah.
So I am trying to look for a comparison between the glazing and the black metal that acts as a window or a break at the facade. You can get back to me.
Okay. I don't know if we have that percentage, but
Not 25.
not 25. So if this panel represents kind of the area, and this one, when we looked to expand it, would be kind of a sliver, like maybe what do you think?
Half again that much.
Half again, 18, two more feet, for example. So that gives you an idea of what that would be.
I think we have a slide over at the end.
Okay, let's go see. Oh, beyond. Okay. Oh, this slide here is just reiterating that we are 53% on the north and then 35% on the south. And this is on to the next design standard, and that's the major facade break at 150 feet. So we can maybe talk about this one now. So this dimension line to the main entrance represents 150 feet, and that's where we have a significant break in the facade. It's the terminus of the canopy, and it's the full height, full width glass entry here. And so we feel like this breaks, while we're creating like one library building, this provides the facade break significant at about the approximate dimension that the design standard suggests. And this is on to the next standard about the width of the rain protection, and to create an all-season pedestrian environment. We won't go into this. We're exceeding that as a pedestrian amenity. Okay, same. Okay, this is to address the 30-inch window sill height standard, and we really love this standard. We think it's a great urban pattern to include in the code, and we tried really hard to meet it, but what we are asking for variance is because we wanted a universally accessible one-level slab. The grades just so happen to work against us by about 10 inches for getting this sill down to that 30 inches. So we have just a couple of spots where that black metal infills the part before the sidewalk and before we can first introduce glass.
It bumps up a little higher in some of those windows to the left where we have workstations immediately up against glass. So it just provides a little bit of a privacy screen there.
And then these next 2 or 3 slides are about not having a roof parapet. So we already talked about this roof plan here. And so mindful of that requirement, we wanted to make sure that the roof edge had really crisp detailing and good articulation and participated in shade and shadow of the facade. And that's exemplified by this elevation where the roof overhang creates the dappled light effect in the shade and shadow and the pedestrian environment in lieu of, and then there's no need to screen mechanical equipment, and this thin roof edge does allow for you to read kind of that undulating roof articulation of the design. This is our last little bit. We just had information about signage. This view is in your packet. We did a couple of updates since discussing it with the DLC. And that was one, to provide an oblique view of it to get a little more clarity of what the proposal is, and then to address night lighting. And so this one, we did look and discuss with our lighting designer about including a canopy light above to make sure that the library sign is lit, because this is standing in front of, this is in the stormwater planter surrounded by planting with that black backdrop for contrast, which you'll see in an oblique view in a second. But the lighting designer and landscape architects recommended actually in-ground lighting to make sure that there's like an aura of light around it and just light up the zone in which it's more effective that way given its position on the above the ground plane. And so it's not quite as high quality rendering, but we wanted to go ahead straight from our 3D model, show what the oblique view of it is from the pedestrian heading from downtown, crossing 21st, along Harrison. Here's the Harrison curve. And so while renderings can't really do it justice, there is legibility from the oblique view, and this only gets better as you cross the street. This is kind of at its most extreme, and so we feel that held off of the black backdrop. That three-dimensional lettering is really cool. And the library sign itself surrounded by green, much like the library building is, as an analog for that, is really strong. And we didn't want to just mount it directly to the building. So, but sightlines are up for discussion on this, on whether or not by addressing it parallel to Harrison, if the sight lines are good enough for wayfinding. And then the other building sign element is mounted to the building right here at the main entrance, and that is depicted here. So that's the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? The applicant? We'll start on this side this time. No?
I don't have any questions.
No?
I know.
No questions. You were very thorough.
May I close the applicants?
Absolutely. Yes, please do. Thank you.
I just wanted to add a couple of things for some clarity. There was a comment made about the acorn lights during our presentation. So the city's actually moving all of the acorn lights to be dark sky compliant. So all of the globes in downtown Milwaukee will be changed by the end of the calendar year. This design will also include that on the street corner. So as much as we will automatically get it with that nice new design that we looked at for the parking lot, we'll also get it on the corner. And then the other piece I just wanted to put out there as we're talking about the glazing, and I was being a little flippant before, so I apologize, but the cost per square foot of the glass, just so you guys know, is about $55 per square foot. So that's part of what the architect has been trying to respond to, I think, from us, is just knowing that that reflective surface on the outside of the building, though really beautiful, is also really expensive. So they've been trying to place that portion of the building sparingly. I've appreciated their attempt. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So we will now note the testimony in support of the application. We'll start with that, then we'll go to those opposed, and then neutral testimony. So I have two folks that are going to testify. If you have some cards, you want to bring them up so you can get recognized. And I'm not sure if we'll need the timer since we only have 4, but we're going to need the timer.
We won't be able to make a decision.
Yeah, okay.
If we don't.
Okay, so we're going to limit testimony to 3 minutes per person, and we'll use Greg's going to help me with the timer. So we will...
The timer is green, then it starts to flash orange with, 30 seconds left or a minute, and then all of a sudden the red thing makes a noise when your time is up.
Okay. So we have... we don't have anyone to testify in support of the application, nor do we have anyone to testify opposed to the application. We have neutral testimony and to ask a question. So let's start with the to ask a question, and then we'll go to the neutrals. So Chris Carter, if you could come on up, and please state your name and address for the record, and then we'll start the timer.
My name is Chris Carter. My address is 10554 Southeast Main Street. So we're in the apartments directly across from the Letting Library. And the one question that I had that I wanted to make sure was addressed is the lighting and how it actually affects the apartment communities as well as the condos that are across the way there. Because as it stands currently, we get a lot of cast light into those communities. And so I want to make sure that is kind of addressed during this process.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't certain how much of that was with the plans.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you feel that through the presentations that you learned more about that and that some of your concerns were addressed, or do you still have
I'm still somewhat concerned about it.
Okay.
But again, I just how much cast light for because there are those the modern fixtures that are supposed to cast light directly downwards. How effective is that? What's the impact on my community in that manner?
Okay. Thank you.
That's it.
Damn it.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. If we could have, is it Roy Lim? Toy Lim? Come on up.
Hi. My name is Toy Lim. I live at 10605 Southeast 21st Avenue. So I live in the condo building that faces directly across the roadway from the library. I can see the front door from my front door. So I had a couple kind of concerns about the parking, the way the parking is structured. The plan is to have all parking against the sides of the library, and without, my concern is, cars are going to be moving from south to north through the library to park, and then I don't know what the proposal for turnaround is on that roadway there. And right now, there is a turnaround. My concern is that people are going to use the two driveways that are on the condo and the townhouse side as their turnaround. If they can't find a space going out one way, they might use those driveways to turn around, because if they don't use those driveways, there's no way to turn around. They have to go down the street, probably a block, and go around the block, and I'm sure most people don't want to do that. So that's a concern for us. The other concern I had is there's actually, on the map of the construction property, there's a tree that's right in front of my condo that's in a bump out. It's always been our understanding that the tree belongs to the condo association and not to the city. The city has never taken responsibility for maintaining it. The condo association's landscaping company has maintained it. So, and I don't know if that tree is slated for removal or not, but I would recommend that be clarified, like who owns that tree, and have a discussion about it before it's removed. And then my last comment is actually a question. What's happening? So according to the plans, there's the fountain that's at that corner of Harrison and 21st. Is that no longer going to be there? Has that been removed? Because I no longer see it on the plan.
Yeah.
So it will be removed.
Yes, it's going to be relocated to the north part where the children's garden is.
You got to
get that on the record.
We'll let you rebuttal.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. We'll answer that question. So the question is, what's happening to the water feature, and we will get you that answer as part of the record.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Okay, so we have two folks to speak neutral. Lisa Lashbrook.
I'm Lisa Lashbrook. I reside at 4342 Southeast Rockwood Street. I've been a a library user for a long time. I'm also a member of the Parks and Recreation Board, and recently we talked about a proposal for Scott Park. And when I say Scott Park, I'm talking about, what is Scott Park? The northern portion. We've seen it as a highly underused park for our city. And so the proposal is for that to become some kind of a children's garden with an outdoor classroom, so that the library patrons in the children's area could spill out into the outdoor classroom. We would like to see kids art, so it's all very kid-centric. The problem that I have with the current plan for the library is that the exit at the north end, where the children's area is, goes to the amphitheater, but there is no direct connection from that to Scott Park. And so that's what I would like to see addressed. I'd just at least have it designed in so that when park improvements are made, the connection is already there. That's it.
Does anyone have questions about that?
I do.
Yep.
I do. Okay, so I not only am I directionally challenged, but I am semi-visually challenged. Could you please explain in a little bit further detail, what do you mean by that connection? So we have the two pinch points that kind of go down to the amphitheater, right? Do you want something to see a path that goes farther north? Thank you, Vera.
Yeah.
Keep talking while I do.
So basically, it shows from the sidewalk, there's a path leading to the amphitheater, and from the north end of the building.
From the door, right?
From the north end of the building where the door is, going to the amphitheater. And I'm hoping that from the door, it will go not only to the amphitheater, but to Scott Park.
So to go further north
Yes.
than what it currently does, and have that put into this project,
Yes.
and not rely on a master plan if it ever develops.
And so that when there is a master plan for Scott Park, that we already have a connective point in the library plan.
How far north would you like to see it go?
That is a really good question, because it goes back to where does Scott Park begin and where does the library plan end? It has to be able to connect up to the park. So
instead of just a sharp cutoff corner, would you be fine with it just going straight?
And heading towards the park.
Okay.
So is it about the door or the path?
The path.
Okay, not the door, the path. Okay. Thank you. Okay, and Gary Klein.
My name's Gary Klein, 10795 Southeast Riverway Lane, Milwaukee, Oregon. I'm also a member of Milwaukee Historic Neighborhood. I'm part of the Land Use Committee, and I'm familiar with what Tom Martin wrote up. And then I'm also part of a Park and Rec Board and familiar with Lisa's issue on the trees. I said I'm neutral, but I'm very happy the library building is being improved and updated for seismic standards and higher city codes for safety and energy. My concerns are that the bond issue originally went out to remodel or reconstruct, and now it's going to be a tear down and rebuild with a footprint twice as big as it was before. What Milwaukee means in the native tongue is good, beautiful, and a pleasant land, and or also gathering place by the waters. Much of the land is in the wetlands area, and almost all of it is within 100 feet of the creek and pond. Milwaukee worked to become recognized as Tree City USA early in 2017, and they made it happen. Now Milwaukee is updating a number of the issues, including standards for becoming for trees, and we have a tree board, and they work in conjunction with the Park and Rec Board. And so the tree codes are right now being written up and going to change and get a lot harder to do. And the big key here is we're cutting down trees, good-sized trees, in this project that's getting a lot wider. If it was further north, you could maybe not cut down as many trees, because then it would just move into the current parking lot. Anyhow, so I'm concerned about that. And not only now, but in the future, when people come and we have harder tree codes, they're going to say that you did this quickly. And I know she said that we're doing it because of cost, but you did it to beat the new tree code that's going to be more restrictive. And especially since you're a city and not a private investor that's out there, it looks like, you're just trying to beat the code. So I'm concerned about all that happening with this issue. And I'm just mentioning that.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Klein? No? Okay. Thank you for your testimony. Okay, so let's have the applicant, someone from the applicant team come up and answer some of the questions so that they're on the part of the record. Absolutely. Let's start with the first question around the casting of light with the.
We're going to let the architect actually answer.
Apartments and condos across the street. Thank you.
We not only will engineer the lighting to be code compliant, but also the best practice. We're sensitive to this issue. And so we would be happy to look at the photometrics from the shielded acorn fixture. I think the one we've selected probably will still perform better in a downward direction, but we're completely open because we are sensitive to this issue. But we do need to hit a minimum light level for safety and no more. So light trespasses, it will be engineered on this one. And then one thing that we are doing with the parking lot configuration as it is headlights don't shine towards the multifamily apartments. They shine towards the library itself. So that is also an improvement for light intrusion.
Chair, may I ask a question of the city on this subject?
Sure.
We have a condition in there that they need to come up with a photometric candle, right? So that's just basically what your candle lights that you're spreading out all over the place?
It's making sure that the lighting is meeting the minimum foot candle and not exceeding the foot candle requirements, but it would also show the light trespass, so it would show where the light is going, so we would be able to ensure both that it's meeting the safety requirements, but also that it's not trespassing over the property as well.
Given the distance from the condos / Main Street Village or whatever you want to call it, and the position of the lighting, in your just real quick opinion, do you think the code will satisfy the fact that the light will not be shining into the building?
I think so, and I think that the design of the fixtures themselves, because they're downward facing as opposed to casting horizontally, both of those, I think it'll be a vast improvement, and they should not be experiencing those impacts from the lighting. No.
Thank you.
Great. So let's talk about parking and the flow of patrons coming in and finding spots and turning around. And so I'm not sure who's going to address that.
I address that. So in the drawing that's on the screen, we are striping out the last parking space as the turnaround in the event that you get down there and the parking lot is full. So it's not a complete forward loop as you currently have now, but it has a provision for turning around at the end in just a pretty just kind of typical way. Head into the parking space, back straight out, turn back, go back.
Is that parking area 6 inches too small too?
No.
So the turnaround area.
Yeah, it'll be sufficient. Yeah, it'll be sufficient for that maneuver.
Is it 6 inches smaller than what code is?
I don't think so.
Full 9 feet.
It's a full 9 feet.
It's a full 9 feet. Okay.
Okay, great. And so it's not anticipated that people will be using the, condo parking area to turn around. And from what, and knowing about, peak parking times and usage, I mean, from your understanding of how patrons are currently, when and how they're currently using it, and that providing adequate parking and their behavior there, I mean, you feel like this design will address the concerns around using the North Main, I guess they're driveways to go into those buildings.
These are the driveways that we're concerned about. Yes, I mean, there are some aspects of it, like if somebody uses this for a drop-off, say, or a pickup, they're already beyond the entry and exit of that. So they would be using the turnaround at the end rather than attempting to back into this here.
Right. So if I'm in the southern part of the parking lot and I'm wanting to back out, there's adequate room for me to back out and not encroach on that area.
So you've headed in and then you've backed out. There's adequate driveway width to not rely on going beyond the line onto that development.
So something just popped into my head. On voting day, that is the most popular currently turnaround area. Has the city then decided that maybe they need to move their drop-off site, or?
We actually have 2 drop-off sites in the city. So the other one is actually at the Public Safety Building. And we're going to have to move this during construction anyway. So we'll be working with Scott Stoffer, who is our city recorder, on finding an appropriate location during Election Day.
Okay. And then there's a tree.
Yeah, so the tree is actually, it's on the west side. It's actually right in front of their building. We were just looking at it in the designs. So it's, yeah, feel free. So that tree is actually within the right-of-way. But right-of-way, trees that are planted within the right-of-way are still the property owner's responsibility across the city. So when I have a tree that's put into existing right-of-way, the property owner is maintaining those trees. So we discussed that briefly. We are not planning on taking out the tree. It'll remain on site. But it is still the responsibility of that development to maintain that tree.
Okay. Excellent. Great. And then the pathway from the children's area to Scott Park, is there an opportunity?
I'm going to let Layla speak to that.
I got to
Thank you.
make you a correction there. That tree is slated to be removed.
This one is, then I'm going to have to work with the property owner. Currently, that is designed to be coming out. It's on the flip side across on their property. We'll have to work with them. Okay. My guess is it's because it's currently in the thoroughfare. So in order to make the drive zone wide enough. Do we have this somewhere? We don't.
Not
okay.
where you pull on the screen.
It's coming out. I was incorrect. So, or at least it's currently projected to come out.
Okay, in order to make enough room for the
drive area.
The drive area. Okay. Okay.
Thank you. I think we're okay.
Okay, so then, and thank you for being able to answer all these questions. The northern portion there, the access to Scott Park and the pathway from the exit of the children's area.
So part of the resistance has been that NCPRD is actually the manager of city parks. So we own the property, they're maintained, they're designed, and then installed through another agency. That agency had come to us and asked when we removed it from the comp plan to actually have a chance to redo the design of that project. And they have said that they will prioritize that in the coming years to actually make sure that it doesn't just linger. It's a location that they wanted to look at. So I think part of the concern is just installing something that they're going to turn around and have to remove. Having said that, I also totally respect the perspective of PARB on this. And if it's something that we need to meet, we can go back to NCPRD and have that discussion with them.
At one point in the construction phase, would that need to be finalized?
In order to do the actual construction of that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can make a speculative comment on that. I mean, this path is essentially a 4-inch thick concrete slab over minimally prepared subgrade. It is not that big of a deal to reconfigure if the master plan has a better vision of site circulation than this proposal. What this does is it just provides day one, if the master plan isn't in place, accessible direct access to the amphitheater, code compliant egress from the building, and the way it curves away from this main sidewalk connection to the north end of Scott Park demonstrates that it's not an entrance to the building. And because it's going to be locked from that, it's a one-way egress only. So that's the reason why it curves away from things, is to not encourage or give the visual cue that this is the way into the building.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We can have this conversation, though, further with the Parks and Recreation Board. It's not a big deal for us.
Okay. And then the final thing is around tree removal and the idea that this is fast track to beat a tree code, and I'm not sure where that is in the process. I mean, we've heard about it and have gotten some updates on the establishment of a tree board, but if you could talk about the tree removal and then that idea.
So I know enough to be dangerous right now since we're in process. So the process is that we will have a draft tree code that we'll be discussing as a staff in May, with the expectation that in June or July we'll be bringing it forward for early conversations with the council and adoption this year. The portion of code actually already exists for city-owned property. So right now, the city is held to a different standard today than a private property owner is, in that we have extensive additional steps that we need to go through in order to assure that we are minimizing the impact of to trees. I have met with staff that manages the tree board process. They were out on site with me today, as well as the arborist that we have on site. He looked at the designs, made sure that we were considering the right types of trees for replacement, that we were also looking at making sure that we were giving adequate footprint for the trees that we were trying to preserve, species, all that fun stuff. So we're actually doing a significant amount to preserve the trees early on. Part of why you have the design you have today is because the city was explicit in protecting that front tree, and that was a priority of the city. And so that's actually why it comes down to that point, is to give it the maximum footprint. And then we had also been told by the task force and by the 2 council members who sit on that task force that protecting that oak line was a priority as well. So that's really where we placed all of our efforts. We were successful in securing almost all the trees that were of a certain caliber. We were not able to secure 3 of the trees. 2 of the trees that are up for discussion are actually abutting the building on the front side. So in order to get the extra square footage, we just simply don't have enough room on the parcel. And the other tree that we're losing is actually on the corner at the rear of the property. So these are all very close to the existing building, and disturbances. We were concerned about disturbances and trying to protect that, on top of which would not be able to hit the square footage requirements.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close the public testimony portion of the hearing. The public testimony portion of this hearing on file.
That's always the fun part.
On file CSU-2018-002, DR-2018-001, NR-2018-001, P-2018-002 is now closed. All right, is the commission ready for discussion?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Would you like me to start, Chair?
Yeah, I
Travis?
was looking around
You're
for
always a good
eager
icebreaker.
people.
So I was not thrilled that we're going to be spending city-paid our tax dollars on a library, and the simple fact is, and Katie, don't hate me for this, is that the storage of books is going to become passé just as much as the storage of tablets and the storage of papyrus. My feelings changed when I saw the first design, because this has turned into a community center surrendered around literature. It has a community conference room, something that is lacking very much in the city. It is open to the children to still be able to enjoy their story times and to have a little bit more of a romper room, which is enjoyed. And it gives a section for the adults who want to do serious studying, or for the teens who want to do serious studying. studying, and also allows for their other programs to continue there. So from a community use standard, I agree with that 100%. The only things that one, I also appreciate the sustainability of the building and the environmental standards. I know that is probably one of another major reason why the building happens to be a little bit expensive. I agree with the DLC term. I'm on the fence with what the new proposed design is for the window glazing on the one side of the building, not meeting the 25%. I think some of that, their logic is pretty sound in the way that they kind of cover that in the new design is not so bad, but I don't know if they've provided me with enough evidence that the DLC is not wrong in their assessment. So I'm kind of on the hook. I would also like to add some sort of condition of the library the city manager, or the construction group, and PARB to come up with a solution about the sidewalk design. Because I agree with the assessment is even if it's just a little nub that kind of doesn't go anywhere, it just doesn't dump everything all into the amphitheater. The rest of it, I think, is beautiful. As far as the 6-inch width of the parking lot, I think I agree with the city's assessment and that we need to find the right condition of approval for that. It seems a little goofy, but did I cover it all? I think I got it. I think I am comfortable with it, with the way that it is, and with everything that is before us. Except for I'd like to add an extra condition for the path. And John Henry, I'll answer this to you now. So I know a little bit about the history of Milwaukee. And so the Letting House kind of originally sat where the library is. It was all owned by the Richard Scott. It was their land claim. So the Lettings kind of bought that little front corner there from Harrison and 21st, and that's where it would have been originally Scott property that then was sanctioned off to the Lettings, but that portion to the north would have remained Scott property. It may not be delineated really on lines, but that's kind of the historic look at it. If that helps you at all.
Okay. So you feel that we need a condition for the sidewalk?
Yeah. I think it can be just as simple as the city manager, or I'm not really sure who's in charge of the project, but they get together with PARB, and when we delineated Scott Park away from being a park, we all had this reservation of, well, when are you going to put the master plan back?
Right.
And the answer back from the city was, oh, well, they've had it on their radar and they're going to do it in 2 years. And both Commissioner Edge and I, maybe it's because we've worked with NCPRD before, we may not have the purest confidence in that they are going to accomplish that task. So we recommended to move forward to City Council that they put a time sort of stamp on it. And so I think the compromise on this timestamp is that, yeah, well, maybe if you adjust the path a little bit, I don't feel so bad about the removal of the Scott Park, and that the path is only directed to the amphitheater and not to the rest of the park.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Argo?
Well, I'm inclined to approve with conditions as recommended by City Council. A library is an incredibly important community resource. I think when you look at the consideration they put in for the context design mixed with the sustainable features and the type of decision making they had to do on the footprint, that's obviously a point of contention, but I think they made the decision that allows for a more sustainable, long-term valued resource for the community. Is my thinking. I'm open to the condition on the path. I wouldn't mind if we can be a little bit more specific, or just help me with what we're doing, the purpose of it, and if we can get planning staff maybe to help us with that. But yeah, that's my take.
Okay.
I'm really looking forward to using the new library. Definitely will be visiting a lot with my family, the kids. I think they've done a great job with, honestly, it's not a great site for a library. I think it would be a better site to have as the whole thing as a park and as an open space. I'm kind of dreading parking here. I will be driving occasionally. I will be walking occasionally when I personally use the library, and it looks like it could be a real nightmare driving in and out of this little thing. I'm just not sure how I'm going to be turning around when other cars are turning around and coming in and out, and so I was really hoping that I wouldn't be as satisfied with the alternatives that the city had put together in terms of make the thing 2 stories or move it somewhere else, which if there hadn't been so much process to get where we're at, if the design wasn't so beautiful, and if the applicant in the city hadn't done such a good job defending the alternatives that they went through, I was kind of looking to poke a hole in it, and I can't. It's all very well put together, and it'll be a great asset to the community in spite of the constraints on the site. So I wanted to be bah humbug on it, and no, I'm going to love it in spite of the issues.
Your automated vehicle will get you in and out, no problem. In 40 years.
I am going to be a humbug on the stormwater management here. I think the city's perspective is indefensible in that what we've heard is that Milwaukee uses the Portland Stormwater Management Manual. You're a little city. We're a little city here, so we look to the big city and say, we're going to do what they do because that gives us cover. If Portland's doing it and they're passing the environmental test or passing the regulatory test, then we don't have to go through all of the science and the regulatory hurdles. But you're doing it wrong. The Portland Stormwater Management Manual says that when a property redevelops, this is our chance to make things better from a water quality and flow control perspective, and that we will mitigate to pre-developed conditions. And what we've heard from Alex, and I guess I have to accept it, is that Milwaukee's code is not going to follow that part of the Portland Manual. They're going to say we only have to mitigate what's new on the site and not what was already there. And that is really not the intent of the Portland Stormwater Management Manual. It's not what we want in terms of protecting the natural resources here. So the stormwater facilities are tiny, they're puny, they would not pass in the city of Portland. And if it's correct, as Alex said, as the city staff said, that that's the way it's written and that's how it has to be, then fine, but do better, Milwaukee. And I'm going to raise this not as a planning commissioner, but as a concerned citizen, because this isn't the first time I've seen Milwaukee just not doing enough on the stormwater perspective. So anyway, I'm going to vote to approve this.
Commissioner Burns, so I believe it's within our purview that if you feel that the water, if the stormwater management plan is inadequate, and you know these percentages inside and out. The rest of us, we have no clue what 97% or 72% mean, but if we need to hit that, if you believe that we need to hit that 72% and you can make a strong enough case, and I'm assuming that Commissioner Edge is on your side and maybe can be able to help you make this case and convince the rest of us that we can put in a condition for it.
Well, so this isn't the first time I've had to get on this soapbox. The previous cases, it was new development rather than redevelopment, and I was kind of thinking maybe the city's maybe that this would be more of a showcase from a stormwater perspective. But first thought when I was reviewing the packet is, boy, they really, these facilities are just too small. There's not enough stormwater management to protect the wetlands and the creeks. And I didn't catch, and Commissioner Edge did, through conversations with staff, that it's being treated differently because only the new impervious area has to be treated to the city stormwater management manual standards, and the existing site kind of gets a free pass. Anything that was previously paved doesn't have to be treated to the new standards. But last time I got on this soapbox, we figured out that it was a technical standard and it's a public works standard, and it's not something that needs to be resolved at this level. And so I don't know. I mean, I was kind of willing to just handle it offline and just encourage the city to tighten it up.
So you don't want to make a case to have it go to 72?
It just doesn't seem like it's germane in terms of the findings and conditions that are in front of me, as much as it pains me from a technical perspective and an environmental advocate perspective to see it being applied wrong, and not in the intent as I understand it as a professional engineer. But I'm not inclined to fight this battle beyond getting it on the record, I suppose.
Well, you might not lose the battle.
Well, let's hear Commissioner Edge, and then maybe he'll see a way forward.
Yeah, my understanding is that the challenge with this particular aspect of city code is because of the inability to infiltrate effectively on the site. And if that wasn't a concern, the standard from the city of Portland would continue to apply here. So there's a loophole that needs to be corrected. I completely agree with that. I would certainly be comfortable, since this is within, I believe it's within our purview to to condition that it meets the criteria that we review, which does call for pre-development conditions, and city code is handled at a different step. And so I think that it's certainly justifiable that we could find that it does not meet the criteria for public works standards for this stormwater, and then it would move on downstream, and whatever the attorneys decide, the attorneys would decide. And that would be what it ultimately is held to under public works review, or public facilities review. So I think it is within our purview to say that it is unacceptable to come in here and say that the pre-development curve number is 98. I think that's wildly inappropriate. The numbers should not say that, even if the code allows a loophole. I think that needs to be acknowledged and called out, because it does not meet the criteria that we review against. With that said, I'm also really disappointed in the corner treatment at 21st and Harrison. I think that's a very civic space, and I really thought that there was a great opportunity here to really connect and open the library into that civic space, facing across the intersection to City Hall, and the school across the way. And I think that could be a really that could be a very defining intersection for the city, and I think that we've missed an opportunity here with that. Additionally, I'm very disappointed in the fact that we are increasing the permanent disturbance area to the natural resources on the site. Again, and I think someone else mentioned this already, that this is an opportunity, this is a city property. This is an opportunity for the city to showcase its standards and why we have the standards the way that they are. And I think that it's perfectly defensible for the city to require that there is no encroachment whatsoever into the water quality and habitat conservation resource areas. I think that this is a perfect opportunity to show what can really be done to respect the natural environment and the natural resources on a site. And we've increased the disturbance. We've expanded the footprint of the building into more natural resource area than what is already done today. I don't know how I can support that. I mean, that's, there's the alternatives analysis, it's a 2-story building. That's a pretty common thing to do in an urban area on a constrained site. I don't really understand why. I mean, I get that there were some arguments presented, but honestly, I mean, it's a pretty normal response in an urban area. In a downtown area is to have multi-story construction, and especially with the opportunity to protect the natural resources on this site, I think that's the natural response, is to reduce the footprint of the structure and move up. And so I'm really disappointed with that, and I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I can support it the way that it's designed that way. I mean, I think it's a beautiful structure. I think the materials are nice. I think that ultimately what is shown here is great if it didn't increase the impact on the natural resources on the site. The building projects, it angles out like a boomerang into the natural resource areas rather than away from the natural resource areas. That is completely unintuitive to me. So, there's a couple things that really just stand out to me as huge missed opportunities. Not a great example of what we should be doing on city land with the civic space on a prominent intersection in the middle of downtown. I'm really disappointed. As much as I think it's a beautiful building and that they've done a lot of things really well, I'm ultimately disappointed with what's being put in front of us today.
Okay. Commissioner Grau?
I'm supposed to go after that.
Yeah, you are.
Okay, so my thoughts are it's beautifully designed. As a developer, I can 100% understand the astronomical increases in construction costs. I don't know that a 2-story building would be feasible. From a design standpoint, I think I'm all for more glazing, but from a construction cost standpoint, I understand the problem with that. So I would be inclined to agree with I think it's 21.9% as opposed to the 25%. I mean, I can understand and appreciate what the DLC was doing there. And if construction costs were lower, I would probably hold them to at least the 25%. But then the city manager came through and mentioned that about the construction costs. So I think that I'm okay with that. I do think the parking spot should be at least 9 feet. I will just throw that out there. And as far as the EUI, I think it's really commendable that they've gotten that down so low. I think that path to net zero is really important from a sustainability and a green building perspective. So I was pleased to see that they incorporated that into the design. So I would be inclined to approve this.
Well, good comments from everyone and from everyone here tonight. It's really impressive turnout because this is such an important building for us. So it's very exciting, but it's very complex. And with the operating costs that were described, the construction costs, I think we know that the alternatives were explored, and this is the best case scenario given those budgetary constraints. It's good to know about the task force that was working on this and their involvement throughout the process and exploring all of these other options. So we know who participated on that and that they were involved in some of these discussions about trade-offs, which are difficult things, especially thinking about disturbing these areas and the water quality areas and the habitat conservation areas. I would say, I think my comments around this are, I'll quote from the DLC that the DLC was refreshed, that it's a unique design and meets the spirit of the guidelines. So that's maybe not a direct quote, but it's what I captured during the presentation. So I think it's important for us to think about their deliberations and the percentages, 25% versus 21.6%, and the arguments and the functionality of that glazing. I think it really makes a lot of sense to protect from, the vehicle traffic pulling in and out, and the children's area and protecting. But it sounds to me like, the DLC, I think overall felt that the design was meeting the spirit, even though the percentages weren't exact. So that's the way I walked away from their interpretation and analysis. I agree. I mean, originally I was hoping that this would be a two-story building and we would be, protecting that natural area and enhancing that. But again, I think the analysis and the work that the task force came up with is what we have. And they are choosing, I noted that they are choosing the greater mitigation option. So there were the option 2, which proposes greater mitigation. So that is something that they're trying to address to the best of their ability, in my opinion. So with that, it sounds like we, most of us, without Commissioner Edge.
Chair Travis, may I ask a question of staff before we entertain a motion? Please. It's a technical question. Or may I ask it of the city attorney?
Yes, but if we stray into an area that involves any new evidence, we'll have to reopen the record to allow
I believe it is Commissioner Edge brought up that you can't, maybe within the purview that we can't make instead of making the mitigation 98% or the drain water down to 72 to the new development standard. Is that within our purview?
Well, what you need to do is relate either the basis for denial or the basis for a condition to a specific criteria that's applicable to this application. If you can say that the condition is necessary in order to meet a specific criteria, then you can fashion a condition. I thought, and I could have misunderstood, that you were saying there was a question about whether you could find that connection.
Right, well, because they have the city standard says that it can be whatever it wants to be because it's only has to match what the current conditions are, since it's a
if that's the applicable rule and they're meeting it, then you don't have a basis to
you don't have a basis to
more
make
aggressive.
it any smaller or more regressive.
Right. You'd have to tie it to some applicable criteria. That's the challenge. I think one of the suggestions was maybe it's time to change the criteria in the future.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Or is a complete tear down a brand new building and it's considered new development. Is it really a reconstruction project?
This is our recommended requirement.
Are they keeping the foundation?
From Alex.
No.
They have to submit us.
So it's new construction.
And we did eliminate a park so that they didn't have to make any of those improvements. So
That's kind of a farce, but.
So if that is the argument, that this is new construction and not reconstruction.
is that a reasonable enough? Tim, is that a reasonable enough?
I've not studied the language you're talking about, so I really can't answer that question.
We hammered this in a previous hearing.
I think you have a precedent on it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So drop it.
I'm not going to drop it, but I'm going to drop it in the terms of this hearing.
Understood.
Okay. Okay, so then I think what we have left to do is consider a condition around the sidewalk design. And I was thinking maybe that could go under the landscaping maintenance. Maybe we can add a condition under that, or an arrangement around the landscaping component.
Is this the pathway from the
yeah.
northern door?
You
Yeah.
could just add a separate
Just add a
condition.
separate,
That's the
okay.
cleaner thing to do,
Okay.
probably.
Okay. So you have to come up with your language around that.
Are we, can I take a straw poll and find out, are we comfortable with the 19.6% glazing, the 21.6% glazing, or the 25%?
I'd go metal, I guess.
Say that a little louder into the microphone.
It's the 21.
The 21.6.
That was the modified from the
That was the
DLC
modified
recommendation, so
from-
yeah, the 21, that would be mine as well.
Am I correct that that's considered cost-effective from what we heard from the city manager, and that the 25 was what was not cost-effective? Because I'm feeling fairly cost-sensitive on this, so I like the 21 then.
Okay.
Right.
Nicely done, Ann.
Okay. Did I miss something? Is there anything else around conditions? Or is that the only?
Do we need to talk about the parking, or is that just they have to
Oh, the
request a
parking.
variance?
It's going to come back.
That's already in the.
If they want it, they have to request a variance.
Is it-
I don't think we have to.
There's a parking modification request.
So let's look at that one
there
as
is.
stated, and if we're fine with that.
Okay.
So it's,
Well, this just says,
It's the,
it just says, shall comply in the conditions, or they should submit an application for a variance. I think.
right, but they're exceeding the minimum, or they're exceeding the
Oh,
maximum.
we're talking about something different.
28 spaces, 24 for the library, 4 for the park. It seems fine to me.
I was talking about the size, but.
you're talking about the.
I'm talking about the width is,
Yeah.
that kind of really bugs me.
I think we should call that out, because I agree. I think it's already,
So the recommended condition is that
It
they
just
have to
says they
fix
should
it or come
comply.
back with a variance.
oh, okay.
So
So I
that,
think we're fine on that.
That's recommended, so we're good with
We're good
giving
with
that one?
Okay. Okay,
We got it hammered out?
I think so.
Commissioner Edge, did you find a justification yet?
I'd probably need a 5-minute recess in order to actually track down something, so.
Okay, I
It
think-
totally
I think-
depends on whether there's actually support within the rest of the commission.
Well, I think what really happens is that Commissioner Burns has already made the statement that we've gone through this process before and we weren't be able to find one. So be prepared next time. It would be my suggestion. You want me, Chair, to do it?
Yeah, I will entertain a motion.
All right. I would like to entertain a motion to approve application CSU 2018-002, DR 2018-001, and R 2018-001, and P-2018-002, and adopt the recommended findings and conditions of approval found in attachments 1 and 2, with the exception of the new design of the glazing of 21.6%, and that the city and PARB get together and decide what the pathway should look like.
I'll second that.
Yep.
May I ask if NCPRD should be part of that conversation on the path, or no? I think they should.
Ann is saying yes.
Drag it out another 3
as
years.
amended.
Sure, why not?
As amended.
Okay, I will amend it that PARB, the City of Milwaukee, and NCPRD all get together and talk about the path.
Now I'll second that.
Commissioner Argo, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
The motion passes. If anyone wishes to appeal this decision to City Council, you must make application stating the grounds for your appeal within 15 days of the mailing of the notice of decision. Please see planning staff for details. All right. I want to take a moment to thank everyone for coming tonight and participating in this hearing. It's just wonderful to see so many people interested in this, and I know a lot of people have worked really hard on it, and appreciate everyone coming out tonight and the applicant for making a great proposal. So, thank you.
Good job, Chair.
Okay, so, see you next time. Next on the agenda.
Good work on the design standard.
Everyone else gets to leave, or we get to stay. Oh, work session. We're still in session right now, please.
Oh, we're still in session.
We have to.
Sorry. I forgot we weren't adjourned.
Yeah, we're not, everybody else is leaving, but we still have work session items.
That's
Done with the hearing.
So,
Yeah, really short.
short? Okay. So we have housekeeping, Part 1 code amendments.
Tell me it's stormwater management.
We've got two packages of code amendments, broken into two parts. The first one is a lot of easy stuff, plus one sort of urgent question. And the other issues, did you list them out in the staff report? I can't remember. I'll let you give the staff report then. I'll be quiet.
That's okay.
But the staff report lists some of the items that we've identified over the past year that we feel like need to be addressed. And we briefed the council on those, and they agreed to go forward with it. But we broke it into two parts because there's some housekeeping for the second batch. There's some policy light issues there that could take some discussion. So, and we wanted to move this first batch forward without having a lot of time go by. The first batch includes a definition change for senior housing. And we have a possible applicant out there for a site who wants to do a senior housing facility with a nursing home component, and they can't fit the code. And they are a standard delivery. I mean, they build these around the state, and our code just doesn't work for them. And more contemporary developments have senior housing with multiple bedrooms. Our code allows only one bedroom per unit. And it just seemed like a reasonable change. So we've got a change that'll come forward. Maybe there could be some testimony about it, but that's the one semi-substantive issue in this first batch.
You mean two bedrooms in one apartment, or?
Yeah.
The definition for senior and retirement housing says that right now says the dwelling units, like the individual dwelling units within that housing complex, shall have no more than one bedroom and shall not have more than 800 square feet per dwelling unit. And that last sentence is what we're proposing to strike. So, because it's a very prescriptive and a very limiting sentence for developments.
Yeah.
So that's what we're proposing.
There's often times when caregivers are living.
There could be caregivers.
Family.
Folks may choose to sleep apart when they get older. There are lots of different reasons for these things. One could be an office versus a bedroom,
Medical equipment.
Right.
There's a lot of options.
Yeah. Is there a purpose for this, such as protecting, loosely protecting affordability of such units?
Why it was the way it was?
Yeah.
No, I think it was written to avoid, as a surrogate for reducing impacts and trips. smaller units, less trips.
Right.
That's what I think it was about.
Even though really we're talking about, I mean, it's senior housing, and so it's going to be one or two people living in the unit regardless of how many rooms.
Yeah.
And so, but it's the number of bedrooms that generate the trips.
Yeah, and the project that, if this changes, we'll see probably in the future if they go forward, is sort of a project that would have transitional care, like some independent living apartments, some assisted living type apartments, and some nursing.
Like how Willamette View set up, or Roseville.
Yeah. So, and that's a very common model around the country, and our code just doesn't provide an easy path for that. And this was one of the obstacles. So we were trying to clear the road so that somebody could apply, could make an application.
And it's modernizing it.
Right.
I mean, which is a good thing.
So we may have testimony about it when we come back, you know.
But the rest of the proposed changes there are typos, there are references that we're trying to edit. We're revising, as an example, the calculation for density relative to slope so that it's in conformance with a code interpretation, that we did last year. So there's just, we have a we were hoping to be doing this annually. So we're doing 2 of these now to make up for not coming to you last year with the code amendment package. But this code, we're constantly finding weird little things in the code that we think clarify or just make things more simpler to understand.
And Bear's going to have more time now that the library decision is done. Yeah. And the NMIA is not quite done, but getting close.
Is it?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm hoping.
I don't know that it is.
I had a question on one of the changes, the professional wetlands specialist or professional engineer that was added there. Is professional wetlands specialist, is that a certified title, status, recognized status that someone has, or is that just generally applied?
There is some certification that one can get as a wetland scientist.
I know professional engineer is recognized as that there's a legal meaning to that, and so I was kind of.
I think that's flakier, having the engineer doing wetland work than having a biologist doing wetland work.
Potentially, but I just wasn't sure if a professional wetland specialist was.
If that's a legal term, like it is. It is a professional engineer.
Let us check that.
It is.
Environmental scientists use.
Okay.
And it's a state certification.
I'm going to guess it's an organizational certification.
I think that's true.
That has some sort of licensure, but it's not necessarily per state.
Because I could see there's professional land surveyors or state, and so I just felt like that.
I'm not exactly sure if it's state.
Adam, I think you're right. I think it's just there's a professional organization, but I don't know if I'm almost 100% certain there's not a state certification process for it. Let us check on that. That's a really good question.
So I just wanted to ask, again, going back to the senior and retirement housing definition, one of the things that I hear a lot from people that look at moving into Roseville or Willamette View is how expensive it is. Mm-hmm. And so I really just want to make sure that we're considering that, and that we don't. One of the problems that we have with some of the housing, regulations in, whether city of Portland or elsewhere, is that, people come in and when they build something new, they build it to the maximum extent possible for the maximum profit possible. Mm-hmm. And so I would just be concerned that,
I just wanted to mention not always, but.
You're correct. Always would be the wrong word.
I don't believe these guys are nonprofit developers.
Right, and I'm not saying that we should prevent such development either. I just want to be mindful of our language so that we make sure that we're not eliminating opportunities for people to be able to afford market rate retirement housing options.
I don't know what price range these guys are in if they come forward with their project.
And this is less about protecting against one specific proposal and more about protecting against future proposals and making sure that we don't end up going a direction we don't intend.
I'm very aware of that cost issue because I just had a mother-in-law that we had to move out of a facility like that into like a senior, not a convalescent home, but a group home type situation with care, just because the cost was so outrageous, going from $6,000 a month at a facility like that to only $4,000 in the group home. Yeah. So it's pretty significant costs.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah, so I just ask that we be mindful of that when we look at how we modify or how we amend the code. I just don't want to set up a situation where we end up with oversized luxe units that no one else.
I also don't want to restrict marketability and people that want to live in their older ages in these places.
Exactly.
That they're not restricted to affordable units as well.
Right. There should be a balance.
I think what this is they have a range of choices they want to offer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. I mean, a range is exactly what should be offered, and sometimes it doesn't go that way.
Well, it'll be a conditional use and a CSU, if it goes forward, it's coming to you guys, and you can ask some of those questions.
But for two residential zones, senior retirement housing is a conditional use. So any of those projects that they'd be coming before you as a type 3 review. So these are the exact kinds of questions that you could ask of the developer as well.
But not exactly something we could condition.
Affordability. Well, we've gone down that path before as well. So.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can put them on the record, but.
But if not direct affordability, the unit mix and that sort of thing. So I think that's something that could be discussed. But it's a good point, and we'll definitely look into it.
There's got to be a community benefit to the proposal.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited now that I see allowing size for historic property identification. I hope that's number one on our list, even though I don't see it in the notes here.
It's in the notes.
Oh, is it?
Oh, it absolutely is. Yep.
All right.
Can I
there it is.
just really quickly regarding wetlands, there is a professional wetland scientist.
That's it.
Designation. Yeah.
Okay.
Know that from experience.
Google.
Well, no.
She just knew that.
She just knows.
Because then her device will be public record.
Oh, God. Good job.
Yeah, I would like to address that one more time. So the city spent $10 sending me 2 things in a week when I can have it electronically done for free. And not to mention the amount of time that Alicia has to do to stuff those packages.
It's your choice. I think we can customize it. If you want it only electronically, we're happy to.
Can you convince
So let's do it right now.
Oh.
I only want my stuff electronically.
Who wants it electronic? Only raise your hand.
I only don't because I don't want to have my electronic device taken away at some point if it ever came to that.
So I think the difference.
That's the only reason. Otherwise,
what does that mean? The electronic device squad is not coming in here to pull away your private property.
There's a public records request or some kind of request, then
it could be confiscated.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, you missed that part of the discussion.
Yeah, he wasn't here for that meeting. So what I just want to bring up on this, because I've been harping on this for a while too, probably since I think my first day on the commission, that it's nice to have access to the physical materials here, perhaps, where I don't want to have my electronic device out in front of me where it could be confiscated, by a challenge, but I don't want it mailed to me either. So I can look at stuff on my, at home electronically, and then when I come in and have
that would be my choice
stuff that I can scratch down notes on and everything, that doesn't cost the postage at least.
You know what? Okay, it's $10. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
7 including Scott.
7 including Scott. That's $70. It costs $100 for a frickin' tablet. you would save the money if the planning commission or the planning director just had our tablets in the tub and handed it to us. Yes.
Come on forward.
Join the party.
Sure, why not? It's always up for a discussion. It really comes down to budget and whether or not we have sufficient revenue. I will tell you that the surfaces that the city uses, which are the sort of the mobile devices that people use throughout the city, I hate them. I hate them. I won't use one, which is why I have a laptop, because they break all the time.
Benny loves his.
I know, he's weird, but I've had multiple people return theirs because it doesn't act like a computer and people expect it to act like a computer, and it gets really clunky depending on what kind of applications you're trying to use.
How about the people that just want it electronically? When they come to the planning commission, they just have, you grab a tablet out of the tub and they plug in either the gigabyte drive that they have complained or just link it up to the city site so that we can.
So I actually have a question around the email thing. So are we not able to do email accounts for individuals who are on commissions?
I think we absolutely could.
So I guess my question is, there is a way for us to bifurcate your personal email from your planning commission email. That I actually was a planning commissioner, for anyone who is curious, which is how we did it, to make sure that my other records were not open records to other agencies for other things, because I had to protect my other job as well. So that is an option on that front too. I'm happy to look at what the cost would be, and I'm happy to talk to my IT department about whether or not we could afford to do 7. It would be 7 additional units. We're in the budget. I mean, this is the time to ask if you guys would be interested in using them.
So the debate is that if we bring in our personal device, at any point in time, somebody could say, I want to see what you're looking at.
They can.
It's, if you are, well, yes, if you are consulting it for things that were not presented as.
Right. But somebody could say, I want to see if you are doing that, and then your personal device has to go away.
No, so the way that we handle it for open records is actually that we would have Scott Stauffer and our IT department work with you in order to gather that. You can't eliminate the record, but it doesn't mean you, like, in the meeting have to turn over your device. It means that we would have to come up with a time sometime within 10 days in order to assess what you had been doing on the device, or what the open records are actually on that process. So it's not as scary, but it is. Yeah. But I get it. I mean, I have lived my entire adult life with every record that I have being transferable to the public, because I have one phone.
Yeah.
So everything on this phone is open to the public. You have to ask the right questions. You can't just have everything on my phone. You would have to ask, what were you texting during the middle of the meeting on this date? But I've actually seen elected officials also have those things open record.
Yeah. And so my comment is that when you look at the saving, I bet you if we were to go electronic, that the planning department would save so much money in time and paper
Probably not,
that they would be able to hire another full-time staff.
How about you put together a budget and, your estimates?
And he can call me.
And you can call Ann and talk about this a little bit more.
Yes, Chair.
I think that it is, I think for now, though, I mean, Denny knows, do not send Greg a packet. And Commissioner Edge, do you want to get a packet?
No.
At the meeting.
At the meeting, we have to have a packet.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So is everybody else fine with that? Should we stop sending the packets? We just get the materials when we get here and we can write on them?
I would love that.
I think
We're good?
too.
Yeah.
I'm not getting mine in the mail anymore.
Do you want to still get it in the mail? You can be the only one that's causing all this money.
I mean, it will make Alicia say she doesn't have to drive around town to go drop them off.
I was the sustainability director, and I was getting a paper copy. I'm just going to put that out there years ago.
I mean, I kind of like getting it too, so I'll
sometimes.
If I can't review my packet on the train, I'm doing it.
No, and so we're the only two that want to get packets in the mail. The others want to just have the materials when they get here. All right.
May I?
Because I can't print stuff out at work. It's waste of state money. Taxpayer dollars.
Yeah. See, you
So
live
Adam,
my life.
are you saying you want a packet or you don't want a packet?
No, I want to have one here.
Here,
I want to
yeah.
come here with it.
Same, same.
At home.
Okay.
All right, so
Review materials later on.
we're good with that. So did we complete the housekeeping items? I'm sorry that we moved on.
And Chair Travis, may I ask one question before I go home of your board? It has come to my attention that there's a water quality concern with several members of the commission and about how we apply certain standards, and I'd like to set up a meeting. I can't have a majority of the commission, or we're going to have to notice it. So I'd like you guys to discuss who should be in that discussion. This is probably going to be with me and my Public Works Director and with Denny, just to make sure that I'm not making any commitments. We are exceptionally busy right now, as you guys know, but I would like to better understand your concerns, not about this application per se, but about the broader whole.
About building in water and natural resource areas and habitat conservation areas?
No, about the stormwater specifically.
Oh, there's only two people here that are qualified.
I know, but
I
I'm
don't mind
opening
sitting
it
that one
up
out.
for all of you to make a decision about who might be interested, to make sure that I invite the right members of the commission to meet with us.
I nominate Commissioner Burns and Commissioner Edge.
Yes.
Second.
We will be in touch, and we'll set up a time.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, so let's see. Planning Commission committee updates and discussion items. In terms of the comprehensive plan update, as you know, we had the town hall, we saw many of you there. We haven't had another CPAC advisory committee meeting, but that is
Beginning of May.
Beginning of May. So I'll provide an update for you after our next meeting, and we're still continuing to work through the same block of goals. So we're right in the middle of that block. So
I think we probably need to schedule a meeting in June with the commission to review what's coming out of
that block?
Of that, yeah. Because I think we'll have 2 more meetings with the committee, and then maybe the second meeting in June will be with the commission. I'll talk to David.
Okay.
Schedule.
we can get more in depth about what the kind of recommendations are of the group.
I learned today that we're losing our consultant.
Yeah, I heard about
Kirsten?
that.
Yeah. It's too bad.
He's leaving Enviro, or? She's had a tumultuous year.
Yeah, you've been following her around. Why don't you just get to the next place that she goes?
I've been where she's going.
Oh, Lake Oswego?
No, she's going to DLCD.
Oh, wow. Well, then I'm going to work with her in a different capacity.
I want to say 2 things. I am very proud of Chair Travis because she actually went to her NDA meeting, this last NDA meeting, because of the neighborhood hubs, and I'm very proud of her. And the other thing I want to say is that David Leviton, when he's out there in the public and I sat next to him at the volunteer dinner as well, he is a delightful and engaging fellow, and you should be very proud of your staff member.
Yeah, smart too.
Doing great.
Yeah,
Smart and fun.
I don't really work on that kind of level.
I will just add to that I was at the planning office recently, and you just have an all-around great staff. Like, everybody's really great to work with.
Thank you. I agree.
Quick question on the forecast for future meetings. I have a mother-in-law airport duty on April 24th, and I think I can come to the first part of the meeting. Is it better if I come and leave, or better if I don't come at all?
That's a good question.
Better if you don't come at all, because if you leave while we're in the middle of a hearing, especially with the time thing, then if we don't have quorum,
Oh, I'm not
we would
sure.
have to cancel it.
I mean, if
And it's like 9,
I was
so
going
if
to
we
say
have
it
an
would be
easy...
better to come, because you probably get through at least one of them.
Oh, yeah.
There's 2 hearings that evening.
And I think that the flight's at like 10, so there's a chance. I only have to leave at 9.
I mean, the field one is complicated. We'll probably take them in the other order. We'll probably take the easy one first.
The ADU.
Well, it
It's
has the
scheduled on
ADU
here that
first.
the ADU is first.
Yeah. I'm not going to be here.
Oh, well.
I see.
So-
See how that is.
No, I do care, but I'm I think it would make sense to probably come. I mean, there's a good chance.
I could, come stay for the first one and recuse myself from the second one, so I can just leave when it's time to leave. Is that the right thing to do?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if the first one really was done quickly, you might
Get through.
be able to
Might get through both.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we'll see.
Okay, all right. Anything else?
Not from staff.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner.